Rise of the Crusader Chapter 182. I will be back. It can't be that you're shy, right? Because I remember someone asking me for more, said Raphael as he opened another page of the book he was reading. Or is it Raphael? Yes, yes. As Raphael made jest of Eliza from what she said during their moment, Eliza covered her face with the duvet. She could vividly remember everything that happened, and it was a side of her that she didn't think exist, at least not until Raphael showed her. Slowly, Eliza stood from the bed with the duvet wrapped around her body. She walked towards Raphael. Raphael could hear footsteps getting closer. Still, he didn't stop reading the book in his hand, not until Eliza stood in front of him. "What are you reading?" Eliza asked, and then made a move. She gently sat on him, and with her hands wrapped around his neck, she stared at his lips and then his glittering blue eyes. Raphael leaned forward and plucked Eliza's heart-shaped lips. "Antilda," he kissed her passionately and, placing his hand on the duvet, he gently removed it from Eliza's body while he continued on with the kiss. Slowly, he stood from his seat, and then made his once again to the bed. It had been seen 3 days since the meeting in the administration block, as well as the escapade that occurred between Raphael and Eliza. During the past few days, neither Raphael nor even Eliza stepped out of the room. With Raphael already having a store of his own, it made it quite easy for the both of them. "I must say, I didn't expect Raphael to be the first among us to be in a committed relationship," said Bain as he stared at Raphael's room door. "Me too," Aidan blurted. Devon however suddenly shook his head. "To be honest, I saw it coming, but what I didn't expect was he would be dedicated to just one girl," Devon said. "What?" As Aidan and Bain stared at him intensively, Devon exclaimed. "Yes, he's right," Bain said. Bain soon shook his head. "But, what do you mean by you saw it coming? You mean, there was no hope for us to be in a relationship, to begin with?" Devon nodded his head immediately after Bain spoke. "No hope at all." Aidan suddenly chuckled. He was about to speak when Bain's voice rang out. "How are things with Camille? Are the both of you still talking?" Bain inquired. The expression on Aidan's face changed immediately. He took a deep breath and said, "We are pretty good. Why are you asking?" This time around, he glared at Bain. Bain shook his head. "Nothing," he replied. The expression on Aidan's face after Bain spoke clearly showed that he wasn't buying what Aidan said, and as Devon saw the look on both their faces he spoke. "What Bain implies is that after what happened between Raphael and Camille, he assumed it would put a strain on the both of your relationships." Aidan glared at Devon afterward. Before Aidan would finish his words, the door that hadn't been open for the past 3 days was suddenly opened. The three of them moved their gaze to the room entrance, and as they saw Raphael and Eliza, they couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Even Devon, who was no expert in relationships, could tell that something had transpired between Raphael and Eliza. "That's my boy," said Bain as he saw the look on Eliza's face. Eliza stared at Raphael, seemingly worried, and as he saw the look that was on her face, he tightened his grip on her hand and walked toward her. However, Raphael and Eliza had only just taken a few steps toward the living room when the door was opened. The two of them abruptly paused as they saw the person who stepped into the room, and a second after she was in, they all moved their gaze to Raphael. "Camille, what are you doing here?" Aidan asked and then took a step forward. Camille didn't respond immediately to Aidan's question. Instead she pointed her hand at Raphael, before saying, "I came to see him." Raphael knitted his brows when he heard Camille. He couldn't think of any reason why she would want to see him, but as she was here, she must have something to say. "Camille, you..." As Eliza opened her mouth to speak, Camille waved her hand at her. "I would appreciate it if you let me speak and don't interfere," Camille said, and as Eliza sealed her lips, Camille moved her gaze to Raphael once again. The atmosphere was quite intense as everyone in the room had witnessed the fight between Raphael and Camille, and it was brutal, to say the least. "Relax, I'm not here to cause any trouble," Camille uttered as she saw the tense look on Aidan's face. "I came to congratulate you on winning the tournament, as well as inform you that I will be coming after you," Camille said bluntly. Truthfully, It didn't come as much surprise for Devon, Aidan, Bain, Eliza, and even Raphael when they heard Camille. She had always been very blunt about her thoughts, giving no regard in the slightest, and these particular words she said brought an amused expression to emerge on Raphael. I'm not someone who derives pleasure from pain, but fighting with you made me realize that I'm very weak, and I'm also no way near where I want to be. Camille clenched her hand into a tight fist. But, I'm told once you realize your flaws, and choose to work on them, it is only a matter of time, and progress is inevitable. I will be back for you, Raphael, and I hope you would be a worthy challenge. If not, I'm not certain what I will do to you. The fact that Camille had her intention known deeply surprised the people in the room. She could have trained heavily in secret, and once the time came, she could challenge Raphael, shocking them with the progress she would have made. Instead, she boldly came to Raphael and then told him the plans she had for him. Everyone's eyes were soon on Raphael, wondering how he was going to respond to Camille. And after a brief moment, he spoke. All right, Camille, I will be waiting for you. A nod came from Camille afterward. She was about to turn around when she heard Raphael's voice. But, I want you to keep in mind that I might choose not to spare you if the result is disappointing. Camille dug her fingernails into her palm after Raphael spoke. She took a deep breath and then walked out of the room. A few seconds after Camille left the room, Bain's voice rang out. That was intense. Meanwhile, Raphael still had their eyes glued to the door. His thought was unknown, but as Gus saw the look on his face, it shook its head several times. Among the people in the room, there was no doubt that the person who knew Raphael the most was Gus, and what just transpired wasn't to its liking. Raphael, followed by Lisa's soft voice. Was she touching him on the shoulder gently? Raphael was pulled out of his trance state quickly. He turned towards Eliza and then looked in the direction she was staring at. Oh, seeing the creepy smile back on Bain, Aidan, and Devon's faces, Raphael shook his head. I have made my research on the systems, and I would love to create a system for the three of you, Raphael said. The smile on Bain, Aidan, and Devon's faces widened as they heard Raphael. Joy was written all over their faces, and soon after the three of them jumped. Oh, yes, Bain roared with excitement present in his voice. Aidan had also spoken in a loud voice as well, and truthfully, it wasn't just the three of them who were delighted. Raphael was also delighted with the system that was to be created. In fact, Raphael was perhaps the most excited person in the room, as based on the research he made, the system was bound to be challenging, and to him, that meant thrilling. It took a few seconds, and once Bain regained his composure, he requested for Raphael's account hidden, and without delay, the points were transferred. Received, Raphael muttered. So, when will you be done, and when do we receive it? Bain asked. Raphael placed his hand on the chin. He pondered for a bit before saying, 2 or 3 months. I can't guarantee 2 months, so it would be 3 months. You would become a system holder before the academy resumes back. Another word that caused Bain, Aidan, and Devon was the system holder that Raphael referred to them as. The three of them glanced at one another, and they nodded their head. All right, 3 months it is, Aidan blurted. Raphael nodded his head and then headed straight to the door along with Eliza. He was about to open the door when Bain spoke. Where are the both of you off to? Raphael raised an eyebrow. The mall, he replied. I said I will begin to work on it immediately. 183 The mall, followed by the discussion in the apartment. Raphael headed to the Academy Mall as said. By his side was the ravishing Eliza, and tagging along were Devon, Bain, and Aidan. That would be 3 billion points, sir. With a huge smile on her face, the woman behind the counter exclaimed. Raphael slowly stretched his card to her, and once the payment was made, he took the item on the table into his ring. While the woman was stunned by the disappearance of the model he purchased, she didn't question how it vanished. Instead, she continued to smile at him silly. Apart from the model, we also have other items that would come to your liking. The woman spoke in a soft tone. Raphael waved his hand after the woman spoke, and without delay, she moved towards the other tools in the shop. As Raphael scanned through the items that were in the shop, A neutral expression was on his face. He didn't seem too impressed by the resources of the academy, and equally, he wasn't disappointed by it. The same, however, could be said for Bain, Aidan, and Devon. The three of them were in a heightened state, not because they were in a shop possessing thousands of items, but instead, because of the points those items cost. It was outrageous to say the least, as the cheapest items in this shop were 300 million points. The model which Raphael also purchased caused the three of them to be deeply appalled because the model itself was a tiny box, yet it cost 3 billion points to purchase. How much is this? Raphael stood in front of a plastic which was rectangular with metal pins all over it and asked. As the woman attending him heard him, her lips curved into a smile. She took the processor from the glass cabinet it was in and turned towards Raphael, because Raphael was standing in front of the glass container when the woman took out the processor. She didn't ask him to excuse her. Instead, she leaned her bosoms towards him, and opened the cabinet. Eliza was standing beside Raphael, and it would have been blinding her if she didn't see the move that the woman had just made. Her eyebrows were furrowed, and as she saw the woman standing in front of Raphael with her nipple flashing right through her shirt, Eliza came in front of Raphael. Is this how the attendant of this shop dresses, or are you just the whoremong? Eliza blurted. After Eliza spoke, she turned towards the other attendant in the shop, and as she saw the same revealing clothes they were also putting on, she shook her head. A disgusted, as well as irritated look, appeared on her face soon after. When compared to the other attendants in the shop, the woman who was attending to them was even putting on more clothes. Eliza also turned towards Bain. At this moment, she now understood why Bain was grinning the whole time. Can't we go to another shop, Raphael? Eliza said as she stared at Raphael, and whether it was the woman in front or the others who were around the shop, the expression on each of their faces changed immediately. No, 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 number. Before Raphael would respond to Eliza, the woman quickly intercepted them. I deeply apologize if my clothes displease you. I will take that in mind, and when next you visit, I promise to find something more appropriate to your liking, said the woman. A slight bow was given afterward, and if there was one thing the bow caused was it made Eliza more infuriated. The moment the woman lowered her body, she had her bosom in reveal immediately, and to further instigate Eliza, she shook her body, causing both melons to jiggle. Raphael, Eliza muttered, there are still a few things I need to get first. Raphael replied with a stern expression on his face. As Eliza heard Raphael, she ensured that he saw the displeased look all over her face, before she then moved to the woman in front of her. But, as for the woman in front of her, she was exceptionally pleased with the response Raphael gave Eliza and the look on his face. If there was one thing he showed, then it was that he was a man of his own. He could make decisions even if it was going to upset his woman. Surely, the woman looked forward to the quality time she was going to spend with him afterward. Raphael sneered, but, she isn't wrong. You dress like a hoe. You should put some clothes on because this is just sickening. Raphael blurted. None of the people in the room had expected Raphael to come out with those strong words just after he refused to leave the shop, including Eliza. She stared at Raphael seemingly startled. However, shortly after, the expression on her face changed, and her face lit up very quickly. Meanwhile, the woman who had just received those harsh words from Raphael didn't know how to react. She opened her mouth so wide that a duck egg would probably fit inside, and as she stared at Raphael, she seemed to have realized that all the tales she heard about him were false. I apologize. With that said, the woman dropped the processor on the cabinet and hurried out of the shop. There were tears coming out of her eyes, as while she wasn't concerned about Eliza speaking to her that way, the same couldn't be said when it was coming from the man she was trying to woo. As the woman left, Raphael couldn't help but turn towards the other attendees, and if it had been a moment ago, they would have rushed towards him, but as he looked at them, they lowered their head immediately, seemingly embarrassed. Raphael shook his head. He took the processor that was on the cabinet and rubbed his hand across the metal pin that was on it. Gus, who had been surprisingly quiet the whole time, suddenly let out a long hiss a few seconds after it came in close contact with the processor. That's what I thought as well. Raphael responded. Then he turned towards the attendants in the shop. "I need 4 of this," said Raphael. As they heard Raphael, they exchanged glances between themselves before one of them walked into the door that was in the shop. She came out a few seconds later, holding 2 processors similar to the ones Raphael was holding onto. One Spectra processor cost 750 million points, and 3 would be 2,250 million points, said the woman in a soft tone, and Raphael wasted no time. He was about to pass his card to the woman, when her voice rang out. "The shop owner has said to give you a discount, so instead of the former fee, you will pay 2 billion points for the Spectra processor." The woman took hold of Raphael's card, and once the payment was made, she handed him the card and ordered for the processor to pack up. Raphael nodded his head. As the brains of the system to be created were taken care of, he moved his gaze to the other items in the shop. He then moved around the battery section in the shop, and a few minutes after he got to the battery section, he spoke. "Do you have SAR lithium battery?" Raphael asked. As Raphael spoke, Bain turned towards the attendees, and it came as a surprise to him to see that they have changed the outfit they were wearing earlier. The 6 of them were now putting on clothes that could be termed decent, and when he spoke, one of them moved toward him with a professional look on her face. "We don't have SAR lithium battery, but we have another battery that's on par with SAR," said the woman. The first part of her word had caused a change in Raphael's expression, but he adjusted very quickly when he heard her complete her words. "SS?" Raphael spoke. It didn't come as a shock to the woman when Raphael spoke of the battery that she intended to offer him in replacement to the one he wanted, as it was well known that he was a freak, a monster, to be more precise. Not only was he exceptionally gifted in combat, but his talents in the field of machinery and technology were also terrific. As the woman nodded her head, Raphael chuckled. "SS lithium battery is nowhere near SAR. If this is the evaluation you have from that 2 batteries, then I don't think this is the shop I should be in," Raphael said. He already turned around and was about to leave the shop when the woman quickly came to his front. "Hold on," she blurted. "The SS lithium battery in the market is of course nowhere near the SAR lithium, but the ones we have it's been modified. But if you still don't believe me, I can show you the approved letter from the director of the tech division herself." A week passed since Raphael began working on the systems, and on the 6th day he began preparing to leave the academy. Sayonara. Raphael remembered the last word that was said by Bain and Aiden before they left the academy, and then let out a chuckle. "Are you ready?" Elisa asked as she stared at Raphael, who was scanning the room with a bewildered look on his face. Raphael didn't respond to Elisa immediately after she spoke. He looked at the room for a few more seconds before nodding his head gently. "Yes," said Raphael. Unlike most students who left the academy with all sorts of luggage, Raphael wasn't holding a single bag in his hand. He had everything he needed in his ring, including the books which were on the shelves. The light creaking sound from the door sounded soon after Elisa opened it, and as they moved to the living room, approaching the door, she experienced different emotions. The past few days she spent with Raphael were one of the best moments of her life, and even though she had discussed how the distance was going to affect their relationship, Elisa still felt worried. 3 months was a long time, and with women lurking around Raphael, Elisa was bound to be in this sort of situation. "Raphael, there's something I need to tell you." As they were only a few meters from the door, Elisa's voice rang out. She abruptly paused and peered deep into Raphael's blue, glittering eyes. "What is it?" Raphael asked in a soft voice. He stared at his wristwatch afterward, before then moving his gaze to Elisa. Elisa stuttered. She heaved a deep breath, and once she seemed to have regained her composure, she spoke the words that were deemed the ultimate statement of affection. "I love you, Raphael," said Elisa. After she spoke, there was complete silence in the living room. The tension, however, rose quickly for Elisa. She hoped for a response from Raphael, yet seconds passed and there was no reply for him. Elisa still had her eyes on him, and minutes went by, and there was still no reply from him. He stared at her, evidently puzzled, and as she slowly turned towards the owl that was on his shoulder, Eliza was stunned to see its mouth wide open. Eliza bit her lower lips hard and then dug her fingernails into her hand. "Raphael," she said, this time around. Raphael reacted to his name being called by knitting brows, but still, no words left his mouth. "Did you hear what I just said?" Eliza paused. "I said I love you." The ultimate statement of affection was said again, but unlike the previous time, she received a response that caused her to be dumbfounded. "I heard, and thank you," Raphael replied. While Raphael's response had caused Eliza to be stupefied, Gus was it coming. It then stared at Eliza, wondering what it was that she expected. Before Eliza could regain composure from the word that just struck her, Raphael opened the room door, and with no delay, he stepped outside. With her hands then clenched into a tight fists, Eliza walked out as well. The both of them headed to the alley, and it couldn't be any more awkward. Gus glanced at Eliza and Raphael along the way, and after it couldn't bear the stillness between the both of them, it began to let out snorts and hisses. Raphael, however, had no response to any of the things that were said by Gus. He kept a straight face the entire time, and it was only when they arrived at the teleportation device that he spoke. "I will let you know when I get home. Goodbye," said Raphael. Responding to Raphael, Eliza nodded her head gently, and once the destination was inserted in the teleportation device, Raphael stepped into the channel immediately. A long hiss that caused Raphael's eyes to twitch was let out by Gus. "Shut the hell up, Gus," Raphael blurted. Soon after, Raphael took a deep breath, staring at Eliza, who clearly was unhappy about what occurred in the past minutes. He opened his mouth. "Eliza, however, before Raphael would get the rest of the words out of his mouth, he vanished from the alley as well as the academy, and even though Eliza hadn't heard what he said completely, she was a little relieved when she heard the L part of his word. Unbeknownst to Raphael and Eliza, as they moved from the dormitory to the alley, the both of them were being watched. "What do you think about him?" a cold and ancient voice rang out. The voice was as cold as it could possibly be, but if Raphael or the other students heard it, they would recognize as it the same person who spoke to them back in the administration block. "He's good," said the woman standing on the dean's right-hand side. "If you were to describe him in one word, what would it be?" The dean's voice rang out. "Gifted," she responded again. Amelia looked at the figure on her left, and even though she was unable to see the figure's appearance, she didn't seem to be concerned about it. It had always been like this, be it students, directors, or instructors. No one in the academy had laid eyes on the dean, and to date, the gender of the dean still remained a mystery. "What about you? What do you think of him?" Amelia asked. There was perhaps no one in the academy who would speak to the dean the way Amelia just did. Amelia was neither a director, student, nor even an instructor in the academy, but the power that she amassed was only second to the dean. "A rough diamond," the dean's cold voice rang out. "What about if you were to describe him in one word, what would it be?" Amelia asked. "Unambitious." The response came after Amelia spoke. There was a change in Amelia's expression soon after she heard the dean. Her mouth opened slightly. She was about to speak, when the dean's voice rang out. "The kid has no other goal besides surviving this harsh world." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "Isn't the goal supposed to be survival?" Amelia inquired as she stared at the figure in front of her. "No," the dean's voice sounded. The dean was clearly displeased with the response that Amelia gave, and as she heard the difference in the voice, she lowered her head immediately. "Have you ever wondered why you young ones are unable to ascend beyond that stage?" the dean asked. "The world has been drained of most of its resources," Amelia responded. While the dean's body was covered in fog that prevented anyone from being able to see him, Amelia still felt a head shake come from him. After she spoke, "It has nothing to do with the world's resources, but instead none of you is ambitious enough and willing to strive to the top," the dean said. "I only see a change occurring when the world faces a threat beyond the god level. Perhaps then someone would rise to the occasion." There was obviously disappointment evident in the dean's voice, and even though Amelia wanted to oppose to what was said, she knew it was a truth. The world was way too relaxed, and a change would only occur when they were to face a disaster. "It's the same with Raphael," The kid has potential beyond this world, but not being very ambitious would hold him forever," the dean said. Amelia heaved a deep breath. "Will you do anything about him?" The academy had high expectations for Raphael, and as the problem was known, Amelia hoped there would be a solution to it. However, it wasn't even up to a second after she spoke, and the dean suddenly burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. It was rare to see the grumpy fellow in the state, and after the laughter quietened down, Amelia spoke. "You have to do something about it." "Never," the dean retorted. Before Amelia would question the dean's decision not to interfere with Raphael, she received a response that very much explained it all. "The last time I interfered with one of the Mikhailson siblings, I almost lost a hand," said the dean, "and that was for the least favorite child. What do you think would happen if I'm to move against the favorite among them?" Amelia's mouth opened slightly. She was aware of a few things about the dean, but the incident with the Mikhailson's sibling wasn't one of them. What? As Amelia realized the dean had vanished from where they were, she shook her head. The expression on her face changed very quickly, and after a brief moment, she disappeared from the surrounding. Meanwhile, Dale City welcomed in Raphael Queen after so many months. "Welcome back, my son," Yvonne said, then pecked him on the forehead gently, and Gus wouldn't be Gus if it didn't request for a peck on its head. Right after Raphael was given his, the saying "there was no place like home" was acknowledged by Raphael. As the moment he stepped into his house, he felt a feeling of comfort immediately. It was a different feeling when compared to the atmosphere in the academy. "I had no idea you were going to be returning today," said Yvonne as she seized Raphael from head to toe. "But, better late than never. Why don't you go freshen up, while I have your meal prepared?" A nod came from Raphael soon after his mother spoke, and steadily he headed to his room. It took only a few minutes, and he arrived at his room door. Creak as the door was pushed open, Raphael slowly walked inside. His room was exactly how he left it. There was no change, and even the dust that should have been there was being cleaned. Raphael assumed this would have been done by his mother, and turning towards his bed, he heaved a deep breath. Suddenly, Gus, who was sitting on Raphael's, flew towards his perch. Gus moved around the perch, letting out sounds that caused the smile on Raphael's face to widen. "There's really no place like home," Raphael blurted, a second after Raphael spoke, and he leapt onto the bed. He stretched his body wide, and a huge smile hung on his face. If any one of the people in the academy should see Raphael acting this way, they would have been extremely shocked. As in the academy, Raphael always had either a stern or neutral expression on his face. The number of times he had smiled could be counted on one hand, but now that he was home, he was a completely different person. Raphael changed his position around the bed, and it didn't take long after his eyes twitched slightly that he fell asleep. Gus, who had just found that suitable spot on its bird perch, turned towards Raphael, and then shook its head. It then closed both of its eyes afterward and fell asleep, just like Raphael. A few minutes after both human and beast fell asleep, a creaking sound came from the door, and as Yvonne saw the both of them, her lips curved inwardly. No words left her mouth, but after glancing at the both of them for a few more seconds, she left the room. Raphael slept throughout the whole afternoon, and it was only when a long S sound echoed around him that he began to regain his clarity. He rubbed his eyes a couple of times, and as he saw Gus on the bed glaring at him, Raphael moved his gaze around the room. "What is it?" he inquired after finding no one in the room. Responding to Raphael, Gus let out a long hiss, which was then followed by a snort. Its words caused Raphael to sit upright, and there, the expression on his face became stern immediately. That could demonstrate how crucial what he had just heard from Gus was. "There's no way I'm letting this happen." Raphael leapt from his bed afterward. He was about to open the door, when Gus's voice rang out again, and immediately as he heard Gus, Raphael paused. He didn't respond to Gus. Instead, he rushed to the bathroom right away. The sound of the water splattering came after, and less than 5 minutes after Raphael rushed to the bathroom, he came out wearing a blue rope, and his hair was very wet. "That arsehole," Raphael exclaimed as Gus was nowhere to be found in the room. He wasted no other time and dashed out of the room. "Gus, We have both wondered what an owl meat would taste like, but now, one of us would finally get to taste," said Raphael as he walked down the staircase. Raphael took a step to the living room and paused. "Why you?" he stuttered as he saw the look that was on his mother's face. Yvonne folded her hand across her chest, and then lowered her eyebrows. She glared at Raphael when he got to the living room. "Come here," said Yvonne. Raphael took a step backward after his mother spoke. However, he had only just moved backward, when Yvonne pointed her hand to the dining table, scrumptiously mouth-watering. Raphael licked his lips as he saw the luscious food that was on the table. He gulped, and as he stared at his mother, he walked gently toward her. Yvonne nodded her head, as he moved towards her. However, just as he was going to reach her arm's length, Raphael suddenly moved past her. He let out a chuckle as he headed to the dining table. In front of him were the famous buffalo wings, bread pudding, deep fish pizzas, prime rib, and most especially the lobster roll. Raphael stared at the entities in his front, and then rubbed his hands together. He was right about to move towards the lobster roll when a voice rang out. "Raphael!" As Raphael heard his mother's voice, he abruptly paused. He closed his mouth, which was about to take in the lobster roll, and then gently placed it back on the plate. Yvonne sneered and then walked over to the dining table. Raphael already had eyes glaring at the blue owl in front of him, and as his mother arrived at the table, he moved his gaze toward her. "So, you have forgotten your manners just after leaving home for a few months," said Yvonne. Raphael took a deep breath. "Bless our food and our drink, and bless the hand that has prepared the food for us." Raphael turned towards Yvonne, who then shook her head at him. "Still, not going to include that person, right?" In response, Raphael shook his head. "May I?" Raphael asked, and once he received a nod from his mother, he dived in immediately. The same was for Gus, who was on the table. After it said its prayers, and Yvonne nodded her head, it went after the buffalo wings quickly. "So good," Raphael blurted as he ate the lobster roll in his mouth. The lobster roll wasn't just looking enticing on the table, its taste was even better, and if they were one word to describe what Raphael felt when it entered his mouth, then it was terrific. As Raphael found the lobster roll to be of absolute delight, Gus was also left flabbergasted by how the buffalo wings tasted. It let out a sound that indicated just how amazing the buffalo wings were. "Were the both of you not fed in the academy? That place is very decent, so how come you weren't fed?" said Yvonne as she stared at the duo in front of her. Responding to Yvonne, Gus let out a snort, which then caused Raphael to nod his head several times. "Yes, it's nothing compared," Raphael said with food in his mouth. "I guess so." Yvonne brought a cup of water closer to Raphael, as he continued to eat the food. Raphael smiled. "I'm going to need you to cook lots of food, which I will take with me. You don't have to worry about it spoiling. I will create something that would ensure that doesn't happen," Raphael said, and then bit down the prime rib in his hand. His words had caused Yvonne to be a little startled. "Is the food over there that bad? But I was told the both of you are fed well," Yvonne mumbled. Raphael would have found those words suspicious, but the taste of the food in his mouth didn't let him think that deeply, and instead, he nodded his head at Yvonne, acknowledging that the food in the academy was, in fact, terrible. "There's still more buffalo wings if you want, Gus," said Yvonne as she saw Gus finish the last buffalo wings on the table. A hiss, then a snort, and another hiss was let out by Gus. It then kept nodding its head, as Yvonne placed another set of buffalo wings on the table. Raphael chuckled. "Is there more lobster roll, and some of this?" he asked, pointing his hand at the portion of the prime rib that was left. Yvonne nodded her head, and within a few seconds, another lobster roll and prime rib were brought to the table. Both human and beast grinned once again as they saw the food in front of them. The difference between the Academy buffalo wings and Yvonne's own was very clear. Yvonne created a delicious combo of hot sauce, red pepper, and butter with her buffalo wing, something which the Academy's chefs were unable to achieve. The same could be said for the lobster roll in front of Raphael, as, unlike the Academy lobster roll, Yvonne's making was chilled and tossed with mayo and celery. It brought out the uniqueness contained in the food. Not to worry, okay, now that you're both at home, I will make sure you are well fed, Yvonne said with a smile on her face. Raphael nodded his head repeatedly. Raphael mumbled, rubbing his belly and then licking his lips afterward. A smile hung on his face the entire time, and as he stared at Gus, who was now laying on the table with a belly triple its previous size, the smile on his face widened. As it turns out, both of them had underestimated Yvonne when she said that she was going to ensure they were well fed. Suddenly, Yvonne walked into the dining table with another plate in her hand. Is that okay? I have more if you'd like. The instant she spoke, Gus's eyes sprang open. It then stared at Yvonne with fear evident in both eyes. Meanwhile, Raphael shook his head. He was done for today. The amount of food he ate was enough to feed an entire family, yet he and Gus consumed it all in just a sitting. Raphael was about to thank his mother for the meal when a loud noise suddenly sounded. The loud voice of multiple people could soon be heard, and hearing what seemed to wail coming from outside, Raphael raised an eyebrow, and then stood from his seat. It wasn't just Raphael who was alerted by the noise, Gus was as well, and the previous worn-out demeanor it had around vanished, almost as though it were never there in the first place. Gus glared at the door, and the next move it made was to fly toward Yvonne, sitting on her shoulder. Gus glanced at the whole surrounding with a very grim look. Raphael nodded his head when he saw Gus fly towards his mother. He bowed his hand into a fist soon after and was about to head towards the door when Yvonne's voice rang out. What do the both of you think you're doing? Yvonne chuckled a second after she spoke. Relax, the city isn't under attack, said Yvonne as she stared at Raphael and Gus, who was on her shoulder. However, despite the word that she said, the expression on Raphael and Gus's faces didn't change in the slightest. The both of them displayed a stance that showed that if any bit of movement were to occur in the room, they were prepared to laugh at whatever it is, with the goal being to kill. Yvonne shook her head. Will the both of you relax? It's just the Holmes family returning from the farm, said Yvonne. Raphael raised an eyebrow. Didn't they only just go last week? How come they are going this week again? Raphael inquired. A change of expression came from Yvonne after Raphael spoke. She folded her hands across her chest and said, How did you know about them visiting the farm last week? It can't be that you were keeping tabs on the city while you were in the academy. Responding to Yvonne, Raphael simply flashed her a rough smile. Ouch! What came after was Raphael's voice as Yvonne suddenly appeared in front of him, and twisted his ear. Raphael wailed as his mother held nothing back. She seemed to intend on pulling his ear apart. You really don't listen to me, Yvonne said, and then separated her hand from Raphael's ear. Raphael grabbed his ear and was about to retort when the living room door was pushed open and a gray-haired man with a slender build walked inside. As the man took a few steps into the house, he abruptly paused when he got to the living room. There was then fear evident on his face, as he came in contact with the youth deemed as the devil incarnate. Earlier, he had come in to inform Yvonne of an important matter, but as he came in contact with that cold and emotionless eyes, everything he intended to say was forgotten. Alan, how may I help you? Said Yvonne as she saw the man in her house. A snort came from Gus, that brought killing intent flashing with Raphael's eyes. Alan, he gulped hard. He knew he had to speak, and it better be reasonable, or else he was going to be facing serious consequences. There, Alan stuttered. The pressure was intense, and to be honest, if he knew that the devil incarnate was back in the city, he would have never stepped out of his house, not to talk of coming to the devil incarnate home. However, if there was one thing certain, then it was that the good days were over, and it was once again the moment of the devil incarnate. As Yvonne saw the look on Ellen's face, she naturally knew it was because of the brown-haired youth standing beside her, and as she glanced at him, she shook her head. Raphael, if you're this displeased about the man, don't you think you should let him speak, so he can be on his way, said Yvonne. Raphael knitted his brows. He, however, couldn't help but agree with what his mother said. Besides, he considers Alan to be of any threat in the slightest. Based on what he knew about him, even the weakest meta-human would be able to defeat Alan. Speak, don't worry, I won't harm you, Raphael blurted. While Raphael was known to commit all sorts of deeds in the world, lying wasn't one of them. He could as well as slaughter innocent so long as it meets his goal, but still lying wasn't one of them. Apart from being handsome, humorous, unique, compassionate, extremely talented, and skillful, that was his other best trait according to Yvonne. The Holmes family have been robbed, Alan blurted. Everything they own out of the city, including their farms, has been taken away from them, Alan said as he stared at Yvonne. The town head pleads for you to request for those people who helped you last time to come to the Holmes family. Alan paused. Their products are mostly what we eat, and without them, we will starve to death. Once Alan opened his mouth, he fought through the stuttering, and as Raphael moved his gaze from him, he was able to speak in a clear voice. Yvonne, we beg for you to help the city recover the farm. Alan was about to go on his knees when Yvonne lifted him with a casual wave of the hand. Yvonne heaved a deep breath. Who are the ones outside? She asked. Everyone in the city, Alan replied. Yvonne's mouth opened slightly. She turned towards Raphael, and before she would speak, Raphael's voice rang out. I know what to do, Raphael blurted. With that said, and he walked towards the door. Alan's eyes twitched. Clearly, he wasn't expecting Raphael to move, and while he didn't know what Raphael planned, with the little experience he had, there was no way it would be in the city's favor. Why Yvonne? As Alan saw the look on Yvonne, he immediately sealed his lips. He lowered his head immediately. While Yvonne might act like someone who was incapable of harming an insect, he refused to believe that someone who was able to raise the devil incarnate didn't have some screw loosened in her head. But, hold on, Raphael, what do you plan on doing? Yvonne asked as Raphael got to the door. The right thing, mother, Raphael replied. Which is? Yvonne inquired. Chase them from the front of our house. Of course, said Raphael, and before Yvonne would speak, he stepped out of the house. Meanwhile, Alan's mouth was wide open. He was a little shocked at that answer, but after a brief moment, he turned around. Yvonne glanced at Gus, who was laughing at the situation, and before Raphael would send the people outside away, she rushed out quickly. Let's hope she agrees to help, or else we will be in a serious mess. Yes, the city has been very nice to her and her son ever since they came here, so if she has the means of helping us when needed, there should be no reason why she shouldn't. The people outside of Yvonne's house discussed this among themselves after Alan walked into the house. It went on until the door of the house was opened, and as they saw that familiar face in front of them, they all sealed their lips immediately. Fear swept all over their body immediately, to the extent that a few of them ran from the sight of the brown-haired youth in front. With his hand folded across his chest, Raphael let out a chuckle soon after he saw the people outside. Sir Raphael, we didn't know you were around. We apologize for the disturbance. It won't ever happen again. Once the city head's voice rang out, none of the people in the surroundings wasted any other time, and they turned around quickly. However, they had only just moved a few steps when Raphael spoke. The audacity of you to walk out in my presence. It was merely a few words, but the impact it had on the people in the surrounding was massive. Beads of sweat immediately gathered around their forehead, and even though they desperately wanted to move, they found themselves incapable of moving an inch. Raphael's lips curved inwardly. I'm only messing with you. I must say, I missed how it used to be around here, said Raphael as he stared at his surrounding. Anyway, I heard you need some help. Raphael paused. I'm not an ungrateful person, and considering what you all have done for me, I will help you. Raphael allowed them to assimilate what he had just said, and a few seconds later, he waved his hand. This is some of the finest weapons I've created. Take any weapon of your choice, then we go get what rightly belongs to us. Meanwhile, Alan's mouth was wide open. He was a little shocked at that answer, but after a brief moment, he turned around. Yvonne glanced at Gus, who was laughing at the situation, and before Raphael would send the people outside away, she rushed out quickly. Let's hope she agrees to help, or else we will be in a serious mess. Yes, the city has been very nice to her and her son ever since they came here, so if she has the means of helping us when needed, there should be no reason why she shouldn't. The people outside of Yvonne's house discussed this among themselves after Alan walked into the house. It went on until the door of the house was opened, and as they saw that familiar face in front of them, they all sealed their lips immediately. Fear swept all over their body immediately, to the extent that a few of them ran from the sight of the brown-haired youth in front. He, with his hand folded across his chest, Raphael let out a chuckle soon after he saw the people outside. Sir Raphael, we didn't know you were around. We apologize for the disturbance. It won't ever happen again. Once the city head's voice rang out, none of the people in the surroundings wasted any other time, and they turned around quickly. However, they had only just moved a few steps when Raphael spoke. The audacity of you to walk out in my presence. It was merely a few words, but the impact it had on the people in the surrounding was massive. Beads of sweat immediately gathered around their forehead, and even though they desperately wanted to move, they found themselves incapable of moving an inch. Raphael's lips curved inwardly. I'm only messing with you. I must say, I missed how it used to be around here, said Raphael as he stared at his surrounding. Anyway, I heard you need some help. Raphael paused. I'm not an ungrateful person, and considering what you all have done for me, I will help you. Raphael allowed them to assimilate what he had just said, and a few seconds later, he waved his hand. This is some of the finest weapons I've created. Take any weapon of your choice, then we go get what rightly belongs to us. A confused, as well as a dumbfounded expression, appeared on the faces of the people in the surrounding after Raphael spoke. The weapons which were on the floor made it more confusing as they wondered if Raphael had been hit in the head or something. Raphael soon shook his head. Don't you want to recover what was stolen from you, the farms, and the rest? He asked. A nod came from the people in front of him afterward. They stared at him for a few seconds before then moving their gaze to the weapons that were laying on the ground. You mean, we? Before the woman in the midst would complete for her words, Raphael nodded his head repeatedly. This has been happening for quite some time, and now that those people have gone to the length of stealing all your belongings, don't you think you should retaliate? Said Raphael. You have all been bullied, pushed to the breaking point, so if there's a chance to get back at them, I say you grab it. Raphael was addressing the people in the city when the door behind was opened, and Yvonne, as well as Alan, stepped out. Alan was able to hear a bit of what was said by Raphael, and it made him just as dumbfounded as the rest of the people in the surrounding. Yvonne stared at Raphael, and the more she watched him, the smile on her face widened soon after. So, are you going to take vengeance, or will you just sit and watch as everything is taken away from you? Raphael blurted. Today, it was your farm that was taken from you. Tomorrow, they might come from your homes, and what next? After they can't have anything materialistic from you, they will come for your life. There was a certain level of assurance that was present in Raphael, almost as if he knew what was coming for them. So, what is it going to be? Raphael sneered. Do you want to keep hiding behind people's backs, being a coward for the rest of your lives, or do you want to stand up for yourself? After uttering those words, Raphael allowed them a few minutes to make a decision, and as those minutes went by, and no words left their mouth, he spoke. Okay. Raphael was about to send the weapons into his ring when someone suddenly walked to his front. I want to get what was stolen from us back. I'm no coward. It was a youth that appeared to be 17. He had brown eyes and black hair, and as Raphael saw the expression on his face, his lips curved inwardly. Raphael moved his gaze to the others in the surrounding, and if a youth of this age was willing to step forward, while the old geezers refused to make any move, it was disgraceful. As Raphael didn't hide the disdainful look on his face, everyone could naturally tell that he was disappointed by their action. This then prompted them to lower their head in shame. I will go too, another person spoke, but this time around it was a middle-aged woman. She balled her hand into a tight fist. My children were taken away from him by those fiends. I have nothing else to lose. I might as well use this life of mine to avenge them. Even if it's going to be the last thing I will do, I'm willing to, said the woman. There was determination written all over the woman's face that none of the people doubted what she was saying, including Raphael. Suddenly, Raphael's mouth opened slightly. He seemed to have realized something, and after a brief moment, he let out a chuckle. "What if I told you, none of you will lose your life or suffer any harm?" said Raphael as he stared at the people around him. Certainly, Raphael's words brought forth a reaction, just like he expected, as that was the fear they had. "I guarantee you that none of you will suffer any harm. You don't have to trust my words for it, but it would be you who would be losing and not me," Raphael said. "Now, will anyone be joining these two, or this is all?" Raphael inquired. It took a few seconds, but they all agreed. "We will go, we will go. I might hate you, but I still trust that you won't let any harm happen to us." While Raphael might have bullied them over the years, there had never been any time when he allowed the bullying or ripping off to be done by someone else. It was as if he preferred the bullying to be done by him, and no one else. Raphael's lips curved into a smile, and with a glance from Gus knew exactly what was needed to be done. Gus flew towards the weapons on the floor, and one after the other, it began to hand them the weapon of its choosing. "The weapons given to you are tailored and made for only you. I should have handed this over to you all before I left, but I wasn't created then," said Raphael. As the puzzled look still remained on most of their faces, Raphael decided to address the matter a little further. "The weapons are not just random, like I said earlier, they were created for you. I made my research on each of you, and chose to make something that would serve as a means of protection." Shock was written all over their face after Raphael spoke. They were astonished as this was something none of them saw coming. "This is so." What came after those words were the sound of an explosion as the man accidentally pulled the trigger. Raphael's raised an eyebrow. He stared at the house that had just been demolished, and he shook his head. "Relax, you will get your shot once we get to the battlefield," said Raphael, staring at the man who fired the shot. The man flashed Raphael a rough smile and then moved his gaze back to his weapon. He wasn't the only one who was astounded about the weapon that was in his hand, but the others were as well. They stared at the weapons with adoration present in their eyes, and even though no words left their mouth, the weapon in front of them seemed to be considered the most important piece in their life. Raphael very much expected this sort of reaction from them. He smiled and then said, "Once we leave the city, I will let you get to know more about your weapon. Let's go." With that said, and Raphael moved forward. It took them a few minutes, but as soon as they regained composure, they hurried out of the city. As soon as they left the village, they tested the weapon that was given to them by Raphael, and once each person used it, they moved immediately. The home's farm and the city were only a few meters apart, and after 30 minutes of leaving the city, Raphael and the others arrived at the farm. These animals didn't learn their lessons, a muscular-built man muttered as he saw the familiar faces approaching. He glanced at his colleague beside him. "I believe the boss's exact words were, 'We kill them if they ever return.'" It wasn't even up to a second after the man spoke, and a nod came from the person behind him. Immediately, a bone-chilling smile appeared on his face. He wore a set of dark knuckles soon after and was about to advance towards the people in front when he was suddenly held. "Hold still," said the other guard. "There's something different about them. They are not frightened about us, unlike the previous time which they were here," he continued. His words brought about a raise of the eyebrow from the guard by his side. "That's because of the weapons on them," the guard responded. "What do you mean by weapons?" said the man with a sneer on his face. "Those are simply junks. Where do you expect this bunch of losers to see weapons? Ha ha ha, piece of shit." The man spat on the ground afterward. A smile hung on the faces of the other guards as well. They stared at the people who were closing up with them evidently amused by their movement. "I will at least kill half of them with my hands." "You wish. How will you kill half of them when I would have obliterated them all once I move from here? Ha ha ha, there's no need to argue about this. We can all share the kills. There are more than enough people here for everyone." "That wouldn't be fun." The guards countered one another as they debated on how they were to handle the people heading toward them. It took a few minutes, and finally, they were able to come to an agreement. "May the best man win, brothers," one of the guards said, and then let out a chuckle. A nod came from the others. They were all about to launch forward when the muscular-built man among them spoke. "Remember, the women are off limits. "They are precious gems, so they are to be treated differently," said the muscular man. A sadistic grin emerged on the faces of the guards' faces immediately. They stared at the women and licked their lips. None hid the provocative look on their face, and without wasting any more of their time they charged forward. "Those bastards!" one of the guards who oversaw monitoring the inside of the farm exclaimed, as he saw the attack launched on the people in front. "It's going to be a one-sided battle. So sad." Another figure appeared beside the guard, and after he let out those words, he glanced at the person behind him, and instantly both men burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha!" Meanwhile, the guards had only moved a few steps when a middle-aged man emerged in front of those who were coming toward them. It was unknown where the confidence came from, but as soon as he got to the front, he threw one little bead into his mouth, and before any of the people around him, including the guard, could even comprehend what was happening, he spewed out fire from his mouth. Before those words would be completed by the guard, a loud scream rang out from the person behind him. It was a scream of agony, and once the guard let out a feigning scream, two of the people beside him were caught up in the fire as well, and both of them screamed loudly. The process was as quick as possible, and about 6 guards stumbled on the ground, rolling their body all over the place, trying as much as to suppress the fire. "Help me, a broken bar," one of the guards muttered. However, the expression that he received from his colleagues was worrisome. He was glanced at as though he were completely strange, and without needing to be told, once the other guard that wasn't hit by the fire saw the state of their colleagues, they retreated. As they saw what the bodies of those who were in the fire were rendered to, none of them wanted to experience a bit of it. It didn't matter what had to be done, they didn't consider fighting back, and instead, they turned around and fled as though their lives depended on it. However, they were no up against ordinary foes. Once the people from Dale City saw them fleeing, a plan was made very quickly. "Why?" the muscular man from earlier stuttered as he saw the figure in front of him. Though it was a boy who was no less than 10 years of age, he didn't doubt the prowess of the kid, considering the tool that was in his hand. The muscular man was right about to elude from the boy when he received a full-force kick to the groin. Arg tilde. He placed both hands on his lower region immediately, with terror then written all over his face. Bang! A punch that sent one of his eyeballs leaving its socket landed on his face soon after. The man had only just staggered backward when a spike drilled through his chest. Blood splattered out of his mouth, and as the man stumbled to the ground, there was a terror as well as shock all over his face. Meanwhile, Raphael, who was watching the battle from some distance, was very much appalled by what was occurring in front of him. It had to be known that Raphael didn't have much of an expectation for any one of them. He simply wanted to go, because of the plan he was thinking of incorporating into them. The success rate was one which he hadn't been confident in, but as he watched the people from the city kill this guard without a bit of remorse, Raphael's lips curved into an amused smile. "It just might work out," said Raphael with a smile on his face widening. Gus, who was also on his shoulder, was just as surprised, as with this, they could finally have their plan in motion. Suddenly, Gus let out a hiss, and as Raphael turned toward the direction, he moved immediately. To Raphael, his word was his bond, and after assuring them that no harm was going to befall any of them, he was bound to make sure it remained that way. Raphael held nothing back, making the speed at which he moved and defy logic. Only his after-image could be seen, and as soon as he got to the target that was intended, Raphael stretched his hand out and grabbed the female guard in the face. The attack came out of the blue, and before she could even react to the assault, the sound of her bones cracking rang out. Bang! As Raphael then gave the woman's face a little more squeeze, whether it was her face or her head, both entities exploded immediately. The man who had been battling with the woman with his chainsaw was stunned in position, as he watched the woman's head explode while her body dropped to the floor. He wasn't only the one stunned, the others who were in the area were stupefied as well. However, the expression on their faces soon changed, and they appeared even more confident than they ever saw. None of them had doubted Raphael before, but that was simply because they assumed he had some special gadget in place for emergencies. Never did they expect that he possessed this inhuman strength. So, As they watched him demolish a woman with only making a few movements, they couldn't help but fight recklessly. "Die, you assholes, we're broken bar, you have taken everything away from me, my children, husband, I will make you suffer." As the woman spoke, she hacked the guard who was in front of her with the axe that was given to her. Blood filled the whole surrounding, and even though the axe's severing properties were horrifying, it was up to the attributes that the axe was enhanced with. As the man felt his hands, legs, and other body part being cut into pieces, he also had to deal with the electrocuting that was coursed through every part of his body. It was just so brutal that while the man was not being cooked, the smoke that came out of his mouth every time the woman attacked him, it made it seem like he was being grilled. Kill them all. As the guards in charge of the outside of the farm were being taken care of, so were the others who were on the farm. The people from Dale City cared so little about the crops that were on the farmland, and in every part they crossed, they ensured blood was on the field. Crack, as they were someone who was able to conjure up the fire. Raphael had also bestowed the ability to use lightning temporarily on one of them. The stunts which Raphael pulled would have stunned many, as it wasn't just lightning and fire that he was able to create that handed so many other elements to the others. In fact, they were only a handful of elements which he didn't include. "Run, these people are the abomination we were warned against," said one of the men with high authority on the farm. Before he even spoke, they were already people inside the farm running away. Once some of them saw bodies all over the place, they didn't even think about it twice or hesitate about it, they fled immediately. However, they weren't able to cover much distance when what was left of their body were piles of bones. The death of those who fled was perhaps the most mysterious turn of events for the people on the farm. Besides the strange weapons that were in their opponent's possession, "Don't let any of them escape," he broke in bar, "kill all of them." It was a mustache man wearing black gloves that spoke. The man was from Dale City, and as he was loud and clear it got to the ears of both parties, either the ones from Dale City or the farm. It had to be known that the people from Dale City had been bullied, ridiculed, butchered, tortured as well as humiliated over the years by people who weren't from the city. The trope who invaded the farm would have also gone away with this act, but with Raphael in town, he ensured that they didn't. "Please spare me a broken bar. I have 3-year-old daughters. No one would take care of her if I'm gone. A broken bar. Please don't kill me. My family is in debt. I did this to get out of debt. Please spare me." What came after those heads where the man's head dripped off his body? The wrath of those who came from Dale City was like no other, and regardless of the excuse that was given, they severed body parts as though they were chopping melons. There was no holding back. Bodies were burnt left and right, some were electrocuted, divided into several portions, and the most ferocious death took place in the surrounding. But if there was someone who was the most excited, then it was Raphael. While the expression on his face said otherwise, Raphael was very much delighted that he could bring out this side of the people from Dale City out. He could have forgotten the farms back for them, but what was the fun in that? Raphael wanted them to experience the thrill of it, and if they impressed him enough, he could develop what he wanted from them without needing to seek external help outside. Regardless of how powerful a king might be, there had to be a force behind him. Raphael placed his hand behind his back as he watched the bloodbath in front of him. Suddenly, the smile which hung on his face disappeared, and as Raphael stared into the distance, a stern expression emerged on him. Raphael flicked his finger soon after, and 2 black-cloaked figures appeared in front of him. Both were on their knees in front of Raphael, and as he stared at the duo, he spoke, "Is it ready?" The 2 of them nodded their head the instant Raphael spoke. Raphael sneered, "Let's begin Operation Takeover. And I hope this doesn't appear out of the blue, because the name Maybot was given for a reason." 2 days had passed since the attack on the farm, and Dale City was finally back to a peaceful state. As Raphael then told the people in the city to hold on to the weapons as means of protection, they couldn't be more happier about it. They had been bullied by others and those so-called meta-humans for far too long. But with the weapons in their possession, it was all about to change. Some of them were capable of going head-to-head with the metas. Meanwhile, during those 2 days that went by, Raphael kept himself busy in his room. He didn't step out of his room, and even his food was delivered to him upstairs. Finally, after 2 days of no success in his project, Raphael suddenly exclaimed. He had a smile on his face as he stared at the paper in front of him. There was a well-labeled drawing of a microchip on the paper, and while it didn't seem much, it was this drawing and labeling that Raphael was engaged with for the past 2 days. He tore papers all over the room, as the drawing took everything he had in him before he was able to create something that would be suitable for the project he had in mind. We were broken. Raphael wiped the beads of sweat that were on his forehead a few seconds later. During the past few days, it hadn't been just Raphael who was rambling on what form the systems was going to assume. Gus also pondered very deeply about it. They tried out the various forms that would be suitable, but after hours of accessing the pros and cons, they finally settled for the microchip. The microchip was to be placed at the center of the head, which would then incorporate with the brain of the user, and once the installation was completed from within, the system was finalized. "What do you think?" Raphael asked, with his eyes staring at the drawing on the paper. Gus's eyes were already on the paper, and after Raphael spoke, it turned towards him, and then let out a hiss. Raphael chuckled upon Gus's words. "It's not so bad, you know. I'm only against putting the key of my success and achievements in someone else's hand," said Raphael. "Regardless of the benefit, it is not just worth doing. I don't blame them though. Some of us have no idea what we are doing in life. It feels just fair to hand out those tough decisions to someone else." There was a slight nod from Gus after Raphael spoke. Gus glanced at the drawing again and then snorted. "I guess you're right. It's more like a slave deal to me, too," Raphael responded. A vertical wrinkle appeared on Raphael's forehead. The expression on his face soon returned to the usual, and after picking up the paper from the table, Raphael spoke. "Playtime is over, Gus. We have a lot of work on our hands," said Raphael. "Let's go." With that said, Raphael headed out of his room for the first time in the past few days. There was no doubt that Raphael's definition of playtime was different from what Gus had in mind, and while Gus was certain of that, it still flew to Raphael. It sat comfortably on his shoulder, and the both of them stepped out of the room. "Mom, I'm going to the store," Raphael exclaimed a few seconds after he left his room. He had only then made a move towards the staircase when Yvonne's voice rang out. "Are you going to be spending the night there?" Yvonne asked. "Yes," Raphael replied. There was a pause after Raphael spoke. He didn't move from where he was because he knew his mother was going to speak, and not so long later she spoke. "All right then, I will bring your food over to you, when I'm done with it." If there was something that was bound to bring forth a change in Gus's expression, then it would be the mention of food. Yvonne's food to be specific. Gus grinned like a child who was about to receive its favorite candy, and even though it wasn't aware of what Yvonne was going to bring over, there were already signs of anticipation on Gus. After all, Yvonne's skill was phenomenal. "Thank you, Mum." As Raphael gave his thanks to his mother, he was about to move from where he was when Yvonne's voice rang out. "Oh, I almost forget. The Holmes family is coming with a guest. They said they want to give their thanks to you. When they get here, I will come over to the store with them, so be prepared. Is that okay?" This time around, Raphael couldn't help but knit his brows. He stared at the direction which his mother's voice was coming from and then shook his head. "Is that okay?" Yvonne exclaimed, as there was no response from Raphael even after a few seconds. "Yes," Raphael responded. "I'm leaving now." He didn't waste any further time. After this, and immediately he walked down the stairs. Raphael had nothing against the Holmes family thanking him, but when they kept doing it over and over again, he found it as a waste of time. A day after the farm was taken over, they had come over to his house, and as he was in his room, the family of 12 all came to his room to give their thanks, and as if that weren't already enough, they repeated the same thing on the second day, and as Raphael was informed that they were coming again today with a guest, he couldn't help but be suspicious about them. "Find out who the guest is," said Raphael as soon as he stepped out of the house. There was no one in the surrounding after Raphael spoke. In fact, it seemed to be as though he were talking to thin air. But after speaking, Raphael moved in the direction of the store. "Greetings, Sir Raphael, good day." As Raphael walked towards the stores, he was met by some of the people in the city, and as they saw him they each gave their greetings to him. The former horrified expression was no longer on their faces, and instead, as they stared at him, there was respect as well as adoration written all over them. When the mind is so fickle, there's no way they won't be ruled over, Raphael muttered. It was merely 2 days that went by since the farm was recovered, but the change that transpired during that period was simply massive. This was to the extent that Raphael, who was used as someone to scare children into telling them what to do, was now a role model to the young ones. Everything he had done to them in the past was forgotten quickly, and all they did was sing him praises left and right. Raphael shook his head, seemingly disappointed by how easy it was to change the opinion of these people. "I guess I was wrong," said Raphael. However, he had only just spoken, when Gus let out a hiss. The hiss caused one of Raphael's eyes to twitch. He stared at the youth that was glaring at him from afar, and his lips curved into a smile. "Who knows, maybe they are hoping for some of them after all," Raphael replied, and then moved his away from the youth. He quickened his pace, and after a few minutes, he arrived at the store. Raphael seized the 2-story building, and gently he placed his palm on the security lock at the side of the door. There had been a few people in the city watching Raphael from afar, and as they saw him stand in front of the door, they couldn't help but be excited, as they might finally get what was in the store. The store was purchased by him a few years after he arrived at Dale City, and throughout the years, no one apart from him, Gus, and his mother had seen the inside of the store. To date, they still hadn't seen what was in the store. "It's opening." Those words had only just been said when a blinding light suddenly shone at the person who spoke, and the others in the surrounding. They moved their eyes away immediately, and as the light vanished, they turned back, only to realize Raphael was no longer in front of them. "Not again. I promised myself the last time that I won't be affected by that light. Why is this happening?" "Me too. I even went to get my shades when I saw him going to the store." The people around began to lament, as they missed another opportunity to see what was inside the store. They weren't, in fact, asking to see all that was in the store, just the entrance was already enough, but even that was denied of them. Meanwhile, as Raphael entered the store, he turned on the light and then folded his hands across his chest. "I missed you all." As Raphael entered the store, he turned on the light and then folded his hands across his chest. "I missed you all." Regardless of how high class the individual was, no one in their right mind would see the inside of the store and wouldn't be astonished. The store was fully equipped with the best of the best tools in the world. When it came to the store, Raphael held nothing back, and he invested heavily in it. One of the reasons why he had to empty the people in Dale City as well as receive work from clients was because of the investment he had to make in the store. Though he worked from his house as well, the store was where he created his top-tier gadgets. Raphael cracked his knuckles and then turned towards the humanoid figure that was a few meters from him. "It's time to wake up, Roy," Raphael muttered, and it wasn't even up to a second after which he spoke, and the humanoid figure suddenly moved. Its eyes sprang open, and as it woke from the deep slumber it was rendered in a few months ago, it moved its head to Raphael. "Welcome back, sir." "Raphael," said the humanoid figure. Once the humanoid figure was woken, Raphael turned towards the huge screen that was on the wall. "Lexi set this place up. I'm going to be creating a simulator." After Raphael spoke, the screen became blue, and a robotic figure appeared at the center of the screen. The figure was the infamous artificial intelligence, and as Lexi heard it master, it moved into action immediately. Lexi acted as the brain, while the humanoid figure was the muscle. She simply had to inform the robot what was needed and in what order it would be needed, and it was arranged. Meanwhile, after Raphael instructed Lexi what was to be done, he headed upstairs immediately, but unlike most situations where Gus would have remained on Raphael's shoulder, this time around it didn't. The moment Raphael walked to the stairs, Gus flew towards it perch that was in the store. They both have shared a lot of things, but the upper floor of the store was off limit. "Master Gus, how have you been?" "How was the outside world?" said the humanoid figure as he carried a four-wheeled machine to the area used for construction. Even though the look on the robot remained the same, there was curiously evident in his voice, and surprisingly, it wasn't just the humanoid figure that was interested in what the other side of the world was like. The figure on the screen was interested. A pompous look appeared on Gus's face, after which he was asked the question. Gus glanced at the surrounding for a few seconds before then speaking. "Amazing." While it was just one word, if any of the people who had seen Gus heard its voice, then they would have been blown away, most especially those who were in Dale City as well as the Academy. For people in Dale City, they would have been startled, as throughout the years, none of them had heard Gus speak, and those who were in the Academy would have experienced the same shock, perhaps even more, as they regularly debated on its identity. A smile soon hung on the humanoid figure's face after Gus spoke. "Really?" In response, Gus nodded his head. "I heard there are a lot of women there, beautiful women. Is that true, Master Gus?" This time around, the robot received a scornful look from Gus. However, Gus gave a response to the question that was asked. "There are beautiful women, I guess, but what are you asking? It's not like you're capable of doing anything to them." The usual Roy would have been sad after Gus spoke those words, but instead, his smile curved into a smile. "You know, Master Gus, it's just a matter of time," Roy responded. Master Raphael said, "He was going to make improvements to my body." "You know what I mean." Roy gave a wink that was considered creepy after he spoke. Gus stared at the humanoid robot, Roy, that was now adjusting the machines in place, and then shook his head. "You're all weird. I really don't know what's so exciting about this. Even Raphael did some disgusting things with a woman," Gus said, and then shook his head. He, Roy chuckled. "Master Gus, you can't get it. After all, you are our broken bar." Roy abruptly paused, as he recalled the words that he had just heard from Gus. "You mean, so Raphael did something with a woman?" Roy stuttered. A nod came from Gus afterward, and Roy was about to speak when the sound of the footstep came from the stairs upward. It didn't take much longer, and Raphael appeared in front of them. Raphael could sense the change in the surrounding after he came, however, he ignored it and then moved towards the construction center. He stared at the machines and tools that were in the area, and after accessing each of them, Raphael nodded his head. "Let's start." He was already equipped with his creations and after he spoke, he grabbed onto the first tool that would be used for the simulator. Gus flew towards Raphael as soon as he arrived at the construction area. It also changed into its own creation wares, and a stern expression emerged on its face. "This is going to be harder than I thought," Gus muttered, "but not impossible to create. We have all the equipment already. It's only going to take most of our time, nothing else," said Raphael. However, just like Roy, after letting those words out, Raphael realized that something wasn't right. Raphael knitted his eyebrows when he heard Gus's voice, as instead of doing the usual snorting and hissing, Gus was actually talking. Not to be confused, Raphael was stunned that Gus speaking. Instead he was stunned that Gus was choosing to speak. Ha 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 ha. And a few seconds after Gus spoke, Raphael burst into laughter. The laughter was so hard that it was as though Raphael inhaled nitrous oxide, laughing gas, from the surrounding. He dropped the tool in his hand and crouched to the ground. Meanwhile, Gus's eyes twitched, and he glared at Raphael. "I hate you, Raphael," Gus blurted. However, if there was one thing that Gus caused after it spoke, then it was to increase the pitch of Raphael's laughter. Raphael's placed his hand on his stomach, as he laughed at Gus. Raphael's eyes became tears from laughing so hard. However, he continued to go at it until Gus let out a loud hiss. "Ah-ahem." The hiss naturally softened Raphael's laughter. He stood from the ground, and even though he tried to keep a straight face, he still found it incredibly funny. Gus snorted and then moved its head to the other side after seeing the expression that was on Raphael's face. Meanwhile, Roy was lost. He glanced at Raphael and Gus, and even after a few minutes, he wasn't able to figure out what was so funny that it made Raphael laugh to that extent. "Lexi," Roy muttered, as of this moment, If there was someone who could explain what was happening, then it was Lexi. And of course, Lexi didn't disappoint him. "I believe Sir Raphael is laughing at Gus because of its chipmunk's voice," said Lexi. The expression on Gus's face very much changed, as this was the exact reason why it preferred not to speak. Its voice was always made fun of by Raphael. The only reason it had, in fact, spoken was because of Roy, and Lexi had never made fun of how it laughed. However, that tale was soon over, as Roy chuckled after he replayed the scene of Gus speaking. Raphael soon took a deep breath, he regained his composure, and the expression on his face changed as well. "That's in or for Broken Bar. We will be working on 5 simulators and their programs. A lot of time has been wasted, so we will be pulling an all-that-nighter," said Raphael. He picked up the tools that he dropped earlier and gathered the material needed together. Ting! What came after was the sound of metal colliding with one another. The sound was very loud, but as the store was soundproof, none of what happened was heard out of the store. "I want them all in the molten form," Raphael exclaimed, and then moved away from the machine. Quickly, Roy went to the machine, repeating the same course of action that was done by Raphael on the machine. The metals had to be cast in a different order, and it was only after Raphael saw Roy get the order of arrangement that he moved away from him. As the metal casting was in process, Raphael went directly into programming. As intelligent and capable as Roy and Lexi would have been for the job, Raphael preferred to handle the task by himself. The sound of the keypad soon began to sound in the surrounding. "Lexi, play some song. Let's keep this place lively a little," said Raphael. A few hours passed since Raphael, Roy, and Gus began working on the simulator, and even though the machines and tools for the simulator were already in place, Raphael still spent 8 hours creating the first simulator. Raphael stretched his body, and after sitting in front of the desktop for hours, he was finally able to stand from his seat. "I already have the program and the edits for the second simulator prepared, so we simply need to work on the outer part of the simulator," said Raphael, and immediately after he spoke, the people in the surroundings began to work on it quickly. Roy got the 4-wheeled machines ready, and Raphael was about to take control of the machine when a knock came on the door. Raphael and the others in the store immediately as they heard the door knock. Raphael moved his gaze to the door before saying, "Lexi, display the outside scene." It took then a single command from Lexi and an image appeared on the screen. Being displayed on the screen was Yvonne, as well as 2 middle-aged men and 1 woman, and as Raphael looked at the figure standing beside the woman, his eyes twitched. "It can't be," Raphael mumbled, clearly surprised at the person standing beside the Mrs. Holmes. "Who is that?" A second after those words left Roy's mouth, he received a response that very much explained it all, and after Lexi spoke, he moved his gaze to Raphael. "Aurora Holmes. She is considered a wondrous individual in the field of technology and mechanics, having also won the youngest and brightest engineer in the world at the age of 10. Aurora is a talent that is widely praised in the world. However, according to the database about her, she is considered dead." Lexi's voice rang out. Meanwhile, Gus couldn't help but roll its eyes as it heard Lexi go about on Aurora. Gus was about to speak, when it abruptly paused, as the mockery it was made of earlier replayed in its head. Gus took a breath, and then let out a snort. Roy raised an eyebrow. "Really, she is an acquaintance of Sir Raphael," Roy muttered after Gus spoke. A nod came from Gus afterward. "Wow," Roy exclaimed. "What?" Raphael inquired. "You once again have my complete respect, Sir Raphael," Roy blurted. "Even though she isn't all that much in the bosom department, her face is a complete 10. As Raphael heard Roy, he knitted his eyebrows and then shook his head. "You will be having an update after this," Raphael stated. The expression on Roy's face became grim after Raphael spoke. There was a fearful look on his face, and as he saw that Raphael didn't seem to be joking with the update, he moved a few steps backward. While Roy was able to remain unfazed in the face of deadly disaster, there were 4 matters he was very scared of: Raphael, Gus, the Mikhaelson siblings, and lastly his system update. It was definitely a mood changer for Roy, and as Gus laughed at his misery, Roy lowered his head soon after. "Raphael, open the door," Yvonne exclaimed. She stared at the tiny camera that was outside the store, and the expression which was on her face was nowhere friendly. Raphael heaved a deep breath. Even though he had been informed about the visit, he still wasn't pleased with it. There was a lot of work to do, and even the simulator that was just made could be considered to be the tip of the iceberg when compared to what he had to create. "Raphael," Yvonne's voice got a little louder, and there was a tinge of anger evident in her voice, as they were still moving from the door. "Should I open the door, sir, Raphael?" Lexi asked. Raphael glanced at the clock in the room and then nodded his head. "I believe I don't have to explain what needed to be done," said Raphael as he took her off his creator's wares. It wasn't even up to a second after which Raphael uttered those words, and the store that was previously loaded with machines of all sorts as well as different appliances transformed. The store was then filled with accessories, clothing, and utensils. Raphael took gentle stride, and after a few seconds, he appeared before his mother and the members of the Holmes family. "Good day, sir, Raphael," Dennis Holmes greeted. As Dennis and Danilo saw Rachel, the two of them grinned like a demented child, and Dennis was about to go in for a hug when he received a deathly glare from Raphael. The glare made him think twice, and quickly, he went in for a shake. However, the response he received from Raphael was similar to what he got earlier. Dennis gulped and then turned towards Yvonne. Yvonne had no idea what Dennis was thinking for wanting to hug her son. However, to lessen how awkward the area was, she flashed him a rough smile. "Let's go, Raphael, there's something they want to discuss with you," said Yvonne. Raphael nodded his head slightly and then headed to one corner of the store. Throughout the entire time, he didn't glance at Aurora. In fact, he acted as though he wasn't aware of her presence in the store. It would also be a lie to say that Aurora wasn't shocked when she saw Raphael. She had of course heard tales, but she refused to believe that the Raphael she met in the academy was that generous, and as the surname hadn't been mentioned, she assumed it was going to be someone else. "If he's as good as they said, then I will invite him to the academy." Aurora recalled the words she said as she came to the store, and then let out a chuckle. "Is there something you would like to add, Aurora?" Yvonne asked as she stared at Aurora. Aurora recovered from her trance state, and as she stared at Yvonne, she smiled slightly. "No, Yvonne," Aurora said in a very polite tone. Yvonne nodded her head, and then the discussion continued between Dennis, Danilo, and Raphael. "So, what do you think, Raphael?" Before coming into the store, Yvonne had told Dennis and Danilo to be very brief with what they wanted to say, and they didn't disappoint her. The discussion between Raphael and the Holmes family was about them asking him if he would like to take part in politics. A space in the political seat was open to the Holmes family, and even though the benefits were massive, the Holmes family was hoping Raphael would take the seat. "Raphael, I want you to know that you're free to make any decision that you want," Yvonne said. "If you would like the seat, you simply have to say something or nod your head, and if you don't, let us know, so we can end this meeting quickly. It's your decision, and whatever you choose, I'm happy with it." Raphael turned towards his mother as she spoke, and even though she was able to keep a straight face, he could sense the joy in her voice. Clearly, Yvonne would like it if he was to take the seat. "Yes, Raphael, there's also no strings attached, and this is simply a way of us showing our goodwill for what you did," said Dennis. Raphael pondered for a bit and after a brief moment, he spoke. "Number. What did you say?" Dennis blurted, and certainly the response he received caught him by surprise, as he didn't expect Raphael to reject the proposal. The benefits that were present in the offer given were enormous. Dennis believed that it would only take 30 to 40 years, and Raphael would be at the table with the top powerhouse in the world. How could such an offer be turned down? The answer was quite simple. What Dennis assumed would take 30 to 40 years to achieve, Raphael believed that within 2 to 3 years he would be above them. "What did you say, Raphael?" Dennis asked his question again, and this time around it was in a more calmer tone. Raphael sneered, "I have no intention of taking part in any political affairs, so I will be turning down your proposal. If this is all you have to say, then kindly leave the store, and let this be the last time you appear before me." Raphael said in a cold tone. Dennis and Danilo were about to speak when they saw Yvonne shaking her head at them. "I tried my best, Dennis and Danilo. He isn't interested," said Yvonne. Dennis and Danilo had a few words to let out, but the expression on Raphael's face as he stared at them stopped them from saying whatever it is they wanted. The both of them took a deep breath. "Goodbye then." It was Danilo that spoke. Dennis and Danilo turned around. The both of them were about to move when Aurora's voice rang out. "You can leave without me. There's something I need to discuss with Raphael," Aurora said. A stupefied expression appeared on Dennis and Danilo's faces, and as they saw Raphael didn't oppose to what was said, a light smile hung on their face. The both of them soon stepped out of the store, hoping Aurora would be able to convince him about the offer. Dennis asked his question again, and this time around it was in a more calmer tone. Raphael sneered, "I have no intention of taking part in any political affairs, so I will be turning down your proposal. If this is all you have to say, then kindly leave the store, and let this be the last time you appear before me," Raphael said in a cold tone. Dennis and Danilo were about to speak when they saw Yvonne shaking her head at them. "I tried my best, Dennis and Danilo. He isn't interested," said Yvonne. Dennis and Danilo had a few words to let out, but the expression on Raphael's face as he stared at them stopped them from saying whatever it is they wanted. The both of them took a deep breath. "Goodbye then." It was Danilo that spoke. Dennis and Danilo turned around. The both of them were about to move when Aurora's voice rang out. "You can leave without me. There's something I need to discuss with Raphael," Aurora said. A stupefied expression appeared on Dennis and Danilo's faces, and as they saw Raphael didn't oppose to what was said, a light smile hung on their face. The both of them soon stepped out of the store, hoping Aurora would be able to convince him about the offer. A few seconds had passed since Dennis, Danilo and Yvonne left the store. However, even after it was only Aurora and Raphael left in the surrounding, no words left both of their mouths. Their eyes were glued to one another, but after a voice rang out in the store, Aurora moved her gaze to where the voice was coming from and said, "You have a nice place here." As she then spoke, Aurora began walking around the store. She stared at the area she moved, leaving no place untouched, and after a brief moment, she paused. "What does this do?" Aurora asked and then grabbed the little golem statue that was on the shelf. "What is it you want to say?" Raphael inquired, as he appeared behind Aurora. Aurora, however, didn't respond to Raphael's question immediately. She continued to stare at the golem, and it was only after a minute that she spoke. "Don't worry, I'm not going to convince you to involve yourself in politics," said Aurora as she turned towards Raphael. She stared at him for a few seconds, before then moving her gaze away from him, and then walking toward the other appliance in the store. "But, I find this place a little strange." Aurora placed her hand on her chin. She had a feeling that there was something amiss in the store, but she was unable to find what it was that gave her that feeling. While Raphael kept a straight face, there was the urge to drive Aurora out of the store. She had been staring at the store ever since she walked in, and as she moved about trying to figure out a clue, Raphael couldn't help but get the impression that she was going to crack the puzzle soon enough. The mechanism he used to alter the store wasn't that difficult in the place. An average human being or meta-human wouldn't figure anything amiss about the store, but the same couldn't be said for others, especially the ones who were very intellectual. There it is. Raphael had only taken his gaze away from Aurora when her voice rang out. As he then moved toward Aurora, he saw her standing in front of a control panel with a tool in her hand. "No wonder I'm getting shunned out. There's an artificial intelligence in here," Aurora suddenly blurted. She then turned towards Raphael, who wasn't shocked about how she came up with that theory, and then said, "If you won't tell me what's going on here, I will just have to figure it out," said Aurora. Aurora had only then raised her hand when Raphael spoke. "Lexi, it's all right, you can restore its form." Aurora's lips curved inwardly. She anticipated the change, and as it occurred before, she was left astounded. The change was brief as well as quick that Aurora didn't budge from where she was, yet the environment changed into a place that could be termed as a home for all engineers. Aurora had her mouth wide open, and it was only after the figure of Gus appeared in front of her that she regained her composure. "You have a very nice place. This is amazing." Aurora stared at numerous devices that were around the store and then exclaimed. Despite the exposure to machinery Aurora had received in the academy, because of her status in the division, she was still very impressed with the store. Aurora suddenly towards Raphael, "And I guess you worked for all this yourself," said Aurora, and as she received a nod from Raphael, she took a deep breath. "Now, I see why you're so arrogant," Aurora blurted. "I believe you want something." "Aurora, what is it you want?" Raphael asked. Aurora knitted her brows after Raphael spoke. She moved her gaze from the four-wheeled machines and then walked towards Raphael. "You know, I was actually about to find out your whereabouts, but this coincidence kind of help. I won't be going through the trouble of owing someone," Aurora said with a smile on her face. Even though Aurora hadn't said the reason why she was here, Raphael could tell that it wasn't something he would agree with, and she was aware of that, or else, why would she smile at him? "You know what, don't bother, I'm not interested," Raphael said. Aurora's mouth opened slightly after Raphael spoke, though she had been speaking that at some point. It wasn't immediately, but, "You haven't heard what I want to say," Aurora stuttered. "Yes, but I can already tell that I won't agree to it," Raphael replied. Aurora was about to retort to Raphael when his voice rang out again. "I believe we have established that we don't like ourselves. In fact, I only showed you this place because I want to show off a little," said Raphael. "The fact that you're willing to put aside your hatred for me and stay here this long, even smiling at me, means you want something. But, whatever it is, I don't want it. I'm not interested, and after this, please leave, or else I will be forced to make a move at you." There was a stern expression on Raphael's face the whole time, which showed that he wasn't joking and that he would really make a move if she didn't leave. However, Aurora kept a straight face as he spoke. She then raised an eyebrow. "Okay, show off, but the fact that I smiled at you has nothing to do with what I'm about to say. I was impressed about this place. At least it shows that you're capable of something, and I never said I hated you." "Do you hate me?" Aurora blurted. "Then you like me?" Raphael spoke. Aurora was about to respond when she abruptly paused. She glared at Raphael and said, "I changed my mind. I do hate, but that's not the point." Aurora gave Raphael the finger when she was the smirk that was on his face. She spoke. "I heard you will be working on a system for Devon, Aiden, and Bane, and I want to join in on it," said Aurora. She saw the look on Raphael's face that pretty much asked if she was hit in the head, and then she shook her head. "Before you say no, I want to let you know that I have told Eliza, and she has agreed to it, so there won't be any problem from that side," Aurora said. However, even after uttering those words, Raphael still wondered if she was hit in the head. He stared at her wondering if she was joking, and as no words left her mouth, he spoke. "You're kidding, right?" Raphael spoke. Aurora shook her head immediately after he spoke. "No, you have to be kidding, because why the hell would I want to work?" Raphael exclaimed. He didn't detest Aurora in the slightest. Aurora's eyes twitched. She was, however, able to recover from that blow, and she said, "I knew you were going to say no, but I have something that would be of extreme importance to you." There was a certain level of confidence in Aurora's voice, and Raphael was just about to turn her down when she brought a box out. The little box was out, and as Raphael laid eyes on the content which was in the box, his eyes twitched. "Where did you get this from?" Raphael muttered with shock evident in his voice. In the eyes of a layman, the board in the box was simply a board with several metal pins on it, but before Raphael and Aurora, this was a tool that could change any gadget into pure diamond. It wasn't an exaggeration to say this tool was able to turn trash into a priceless jewel, and as Raphael took the board out, there was adoration written all over his face. "How do you want for this?" Raphael asked a few seconds after. He slowly raised his head, and as he saw the look that was on Aurora, he spoke. "I want it," Raphael muttered. Raphael had lost his composure. Even though he was trying desperately to control himself, he still found himself fixed on the board. Meanwhile, Aurora's lips curved inwardly. She seemed to have expected this sort of reaction from Raphael, and as the yearning grew, she chuckled. "Hold on, let me have it first," said Aurora. Aurora moved her head to grab the board. However, before she would make touch with the board, Raphael took a step away from her. A light frown appeared on Aurora's face when Raphael moved backward. Surprisingly, she wasn't surprised, as the benefits which the board had were simply enormous. Aurora was certain that if the side was switched, she would have also reacted this way. Perhaps even more dreadful. "Raphael, don't you think that since I was able to bring such an item out, I wouldn't have the means of protecting you?" Aurora said, and while she had been hoping for a change of expression from Raphael, she was instead greeted with an expression of mockery. "You can't be kidding, right?" Aurora stuttered, seeing that Raphael didn't have the slightest bit of intention to hand over the board. She took a deep breath. "Okay then, if you're to use the board, you would only damage the project, not just a minor project. It would completely eradicate the project because the board has been encrypted." As Aurora spoke up to this point, a smile appeared on her face. "I'm the only person who can decrypt it, so it's pointless except I decrypt it. It won't be of any help to you," said Aurora. Aurora had said those words hoping it would stifle Raphael, and cause him to hand the board to her, but instead, all it did was make him tighten his grip on the board. "That won't be of any problem. I'm able to decrypt it," Raphael's voice rang out. He then stared at Aurora, with a look that pretty much said it all. Aurora's eyes twitched. "Is there something he's not good at?" she said inwardly. "Even in that department, he is also a broken bar." Aurora abruptly paused, her cheeks reddened, and as she saw Raphael staring at her, she lowered her head immediately. It took a few seconds, and as Aurora raised her head, she heaved a deep breath. "All right, fine, but you will have to return it. I'm only going to let you use it on a near broken bar, okay? 2 appliances, that's all." Aurora had rephrased her words when she saw the expression that emerged on Raphael's face when she told him a broken bar 1. "As for what I want in return, I want to be in on this project you're working on," said Aurora. Aurora folded her hand across her chest. "And I don't mean standing around, or getting you food to eat. I want to participate in everything that's going on." The atmosphere became intense quickly, as Raphael had trouble working with other people. In fact, the only reason why he was able to work with Gus was Gus knew how he operated and thinks. While he had no problem with Roy because he was the one who created the robot, Gus was waiting for a response from Raphael, and as he spoke, the decision that he made didn't come as much surprise. "All right then, I accept," said Raphael. While those words didn't change the expression that was on Gus's face, the same couldn't be said about Aurora. The truth was, if Raphael had rejected her, there was really nothing much she could do, but as he accepted, her cheeks were raised, and the only way she hadn't leapt on him was because she controlled herself. "But, you do as I say. You only speak when I say you should, and you also move when I say you should," Raphael said. "Your opinion might matter in the academy, but here it doesn't. I'm simply not interested in any advice you want, so you might as well as not bother to give any." Raphael held nothing back, and he continued to say words that were enough to crush anyone's self-esteem. Aurora's mouth was wide open, and it continued to remain open until Raphael was done informing her all she needed to know. "Is that clear?" Raphael raised his voice a little, and as Aurora heard him, she took a deep breath. "Good," Raphael blurted. The board was then sent into his ring. "Why are you still standing there? Are you no longer interested?" Aurora was still in a trance state. She was, however, pulled out of it after Raphael spoke. Then, seeing Raphael standing in front of a 4-wheeled machine, she slowly walked toward the machine. She stared at the machines that were in the surroundings and then said, "You've created a simulator for it already," Aurora muttered. There was however no response to Aurora from Raphael. He moved his gaze past her, and turned towards the screen. "Lexi, I need the print of your layout," said Raphael. Aurora also turned towards the screen, and as she did, the previously blue screen suddenly transformed. The transformation caused her mouth to open slightly. She moved a few steps closer to the screen and then placed her hand on her chin. I know you said my opinion doesn't matter here. But why don't you use this? Aurora suddenly spoke. Raphael seemed to want to respond to Aurora when a holographic image emerged in the surrounding. Having decided to ignore any suggestions that she brought to the table, Raphael was just about to shun Aurora's approach when his eyes picked on something. The electromagnetic flux was used in an anti-clockwise motion, making the efficiency double up. Raphael mumbled, "Why didn't I think to do this?" Even though he spoke in a soft tone, there was shock evident in his voice, and he wasn't the only one. Gus was also staring at the image, seemingly astounded by what was before it. There was no doubt about Aurora's skill in the first place. The woman was the #1 student in the first tech division, and while no words left Gus's mouth, there was a slight nod of approval. Aurora flashed a smile, as she saw the look on Gus's face. "So, what do you think, Raphael? I've read tons of books, and the system has always been something I want to create. However, despite how pampered the Academy is to me, they refuse to spend that much on a project that the success rate is very low. I'm not throwing this at you, but the research I have made are more extensive than what you have, and I'm sure if we team up to create this, it will be terrific," said Aurora. However, as there was no response from Raphael after she took a deep breath, Raphael's eyes were still glued to the image in front of him. He hated to admit it, but with the display he was seeing, it was quite true that Aurora's research was more extensive. "What ice a broken bar?" Aurora was about to speak when she received an intense glare from Gus. The look on Gus's face was as though it were telling her to keep shut, which she did. Aurora then fixed her eyes on Raphael without uttering any words, while there was a very hopeful gaze on her. A nod came from Gus after she paused. It then flew towards Raphael, sitting on his shoulder. Gus began whispering words into Raphael's ear. If any of the students in the tech division were to see Aurora biting her lips and then hoping that Raphael didn't turn her approach down, they would have been flabbergasted. Usually, they were the ones who did the begging, while she decided their fate. It took a few minutes, and after the whole discussion between the man and beast, Raphael turned towards Aurora. "All right, we will do it your way," said Raphael. The decision was very hard for Raphael, and he had only just uttered those words when Aurora leapt on him. She pulled him into a tight hug with her head pressed on his chest. "Thank you, a broken bar, thank you so much. You won't regret this," Aurora exclaimed. Aurora's excitement was well justified, as creating a device was on a whole different pedigree from what she was using. Even though she made proper research on it, she needed Raphael to move forward with it. It was the same with the Academy. They were aware of the plans she had, but because of the success rate was slow, they refused to fund her research. As Aurora heard Raphael's voice, she pulled out of the high hug quickly. She flashed him a rough smile and then moved a few steps backward. "I apologize, I lost control of myself for a moment there," said Aurora. "A moment?" Raphael chuckled after those words. He ignored the look that was on Aurora's face and then spoke. "We have a long way to go, so let's begin." Time soon passed very quickly, and after putting all their effort in, Raphael and Aurora were able to create a system by the end of the month. "Ha ha ha." Raphael abruptly sat on the ground and then burst into laughter. Finally, Aurora muttered, and then wiped the sweat that was on her forehead. Even though both of their bodies were covered in dirt, and they were sweating from all over their body, none of that mattered, and instead, they had eyes on the grand prize, the little capsule that was on the table. Raphael stood from the ground. He walked gently to the table, and then picked up the capsule. "I wonder how much this would cost in the market," said Raphael as he stared at the blue and white capsule. "I'm afraid we won't be able to sell it," Aurora replied. "They are definitely going to arrest us and have us create as many of this as possible, and it's only a matter of time before we become lab rats." Aurora chuckled afterward. She was about to stand up when Raphael stretched his hand at her, with a smile on her face. Aurora grabbed his hand, and then he pulled her up. "What do we do about these ones?" Aurora asked as she turned towards the people on her left. Raphael knitted his brows and then licked his lips sadistically. In front of Raphael and Aurora were 3 middle-aged and 2 women. The five of them under terrified expressions on their faces as they saw the look on Raphael's face. After the assassination attempt on Aurora's life was a failure a few days ago, Raphael and Aurora had apprehended the five of them had turned him into a lab rat. Before the capsule was perfected, they had to make sure it wasn't capable of causing any damage to the user, and also test its working rate. And to achieve this perfection, a series of tests were taken by the three men and women before Raphael. Suddenly, a giggle escaped the woman's mouth. The chains which were tied around her body caused her to be unable to move from where she was, but as showcased her teeth. While her body was in a ragged state, it was certain that the woman wasn't mentally fit. Aurora sneered. "You know, I assumed it was going to one of them that would turn out insane first," Aurora said, pointing her head at the three middle-aged men. And while the three of them weren't tied up in any way, they weren't doing so much either way. One of the men had saliva dripping out of his mouth, his eyes were bloodshot, and his upper and lower teeth were presented in front of him. "Please, he broken bar, spare me." Among the five of them, it was only the blonde woman who was still in her right mind. The reason was that the result needed was already achieved by her colleagues, so they were no longer needed for her. "Fool," Aurora blurted, "you wouldn't mind harming someone you have no idea who is, but when the tables are turned, you're pleading for your life." "A broken bar, and it is off now that you recall that you have children at home," said Aurora. Aurora didn't have disgust on her face. She glared at the woman kneeling before her, and as a sudden wave of emotion occurred, she moved. "Ugh!" Followed by the painful voice of the woman was blood splattering, and a second after she stumbled to the ground. As she went to the ground, she had her hand on her neck. Raphael arched his brows as he watched the woman die. He paused, before then turning towards Aurora. "You should go freshen up." Even though Aurora was infuriated, she still nodded her head after Raphael spoke. "I will clean up, and join you," Raphael said as Aurora headed to the exit door. Raphael stared at the three who had moved backward after the woman died for a brief moment, before then turning towards the gun that was on the table. He grabbed the pistol soon after, and as he pointed the pistol at the middle-aged man, Raphael said, in Chinese it is Zaijian, French, au revoir, Spanish, adios, Japanese, sayonara, and finally, in English, it is goodbye. With that said, and Raphael pulled the trigger. Thud. Raphael had only pulled the trigger once, but it caused the four in front of him to lay lifeless on the ground. There was no sign of breathing coming from them, and it wasn't even up to 10 seconds after they collapsed to the ground that they began to decay. It was first the hand of the two middle-aged men, and as their skins left their bodies, leaving only just their skeletons, the others beside them also experienced change. Raphael watched as one gunshot turned four being into skeletons, and a smile couldn't help but appear on his face. He stared at the black pistol in his eyes and then blew gently on the mouthpieces of the gun. "The gun should really be called Decay 2.0, sir, Raphael," said Roy. Roy had also witnessed the gun's ability, and even though he was there when the gun was being created, he was still astounded by the ability displayed by the gun. "All right then." Much to Roy's surprise, Raphael agreed to use the name he chose. Roy grinned and then stared at the pistol. The Decay 3.0 was like any pistol, but unlike the others, it was enhanced with the ability to induce decay on any substance, whether organic or inorganic. Its ability went so far that so long as the bullet makes contact with its target, it was able to break it down into simpler forms of matter. "I will see you all tomorrow." Raphael placed the pistol in his back pocket and spoke. With that said, he slowly walked towards the exit door. The beauty of Decay 2.0 for Raphael wasn't just because it could induce decay, but that apart from him, no other person was able to use the gun without his permission. After leaving the store, it took a few minutes for Raphael to arrive in front of his house door. He was about to push the door open when the door was suddenly pulled from inside. Two figures stepped out soon after, and as Raphael saw the duo he had warned never to appear before him again, his lips curved inwardly. The duo was none other than Dennis and Danilo, and as the both of them they saw Raphael, they nodded their head at him simultaneously. Raphael glared at the both of them until they left his sight, and after which they did, he turned towards his mother. What are the both of them doing here? Mother? Raphael spoke in a displeased voice, as he had told Yvonne that he didn't want to have anything with both of them. Raphael expected her to break all ties whatsoever with them. Mother? As Raphael called out to his mother again, she shook her head at him. Relax, Raphael, they were not here to see you, said Yvonne. They were here to see Aurora since they weren't able to see her in the store. It's really nothing. The both of them just arrived a few minutes ago, and after they spoke with Aurora they left immediately, as you can see, Aurora said. No response came from Raphael after his mother spoke. He was about to take a step into the house when Yvonne's voice rang. But, who are we kidding? For someone who doesn't want to have any ties with them, don't you think? You're too distant yourself with their cousin. Raphael abruptly paused. We have an agreement, and once it's over, we will go our separate ways, Raphael replied. Yvonne nodded her head. She closed the door, and as she watched Raphael head toward the staircase, she spoke. Don't you think we need to talk, Mikhailson? I know you have been avoiding this discussion using the project you have been working on, Yvonne said, but, I won't take no for an answer now. Come to the living room, Raphael, Yvonne said, and then headed to the living room. Raphael, don't make me repeat myself. As Yvonne arrived in the living room, and there was still no Raphael after 3 minutes, she spoke in a loud voice. Raphael had his hand ballad into his tight fist. He shook his head and then walked towards the living room. Mom, we have 2 months. I'm sure there will be plenty of time, but not today, Raphael said with a very stern look on his face. However, if there was somewhere that Raphael learned that look on his face, then it was from Yvonne. Yvonne countered the expression on Raphael's face, by folding her hand and then glaring at him. Young man, did I make it seem like you had a choice? Said Yvonne. Well, if I did, I apologize because there's no way we won't have this discussion today. Now, sit and let's talk about this reasonably. As much as Raphael didn't want to have this discussion, he knew better than not to. There were 3 stages to his mother's rage. The first was the change of name. Once his name went from Raphael to Mikhailson, then it was beginning to become serious, and when it changed from Mikhailson to a young man, even Gus would be on its best behavior if it were to hear Yvonne refer to Raphael as a young man. Raphael might have been unfazed about thousands of things, but his mother's rage at the 3rd stage wasn't one of them. And at a slow pace, he walked over to the seat opposite his mother. Good, Yvonne exclaimed as he saw her on the chair. Yvonne stared at Raphael for a few seconds before then saying, It's like I said back then, I'm not looking to change your mind, but I would like to know the reason why. Why what? Raphael asked. Why, you don't want to take up the Holmes family offer, and have a seat in politics, Yvonne replied. Is the reason because you don't want to owe anyone because you won't, or is it because of something else? Yvonne inquired in a soft voice. Raphael raised an eyebrow after he heard his mother. I believe we both know the reason why, Mother, and if this is the discussion, then my decision still stands. I will not take part in politics, not now, or never. You might as well just rule it out because there's no way I, Raphael Mikhailson Queen, will never become one of them, Raphael blurted in a cold tone. The change that transpired was very obvious, and Yvonne was about to retort to his words when Raphael's voice rang. I will never become like father. A broken bar father sat on those seats, and he sold his soul to the devil. There's no way I will be like him. Raphael angrily stood from his seat and dashed towards the staircase. He had moved so fast that before Yvonne could even speak, there was a door slam coming from his room. Sire Broken Bar, this is all for your sake, Raphael, Yvonne stated. You will need all the help you can get when it's time, and I'm not sure that I will be able to help when the dark day arrives. After those words left Yvonne's mouth, she closed her eyes, and streams of tears rolled from her eyes. A broken bar. Meanwhile, in the most prestigious house and one of the most heavily guarded places in the world, a broken bar, the White House, 7 figures donned in black and white sat around a table with a grim look all on their faces. The 7 of them eyes were glued to the paper in front of them, and after they had done through the paper, one of them spoke. Once we have all those around him wiped out, I believe we all know the next phase from here, said the man with a goatee, and after he spoke, There was a nod from the others around the table. At the headline of the paper in front of the 7 of them, they were one name that their eyes were fixed on the whole time. A Michelson Queen. Raphael raised an eyebrow after he heard his mother. I believe we both know the reason why, mother, and if this is the discussion, then my decision still stands. I will not take part in politics, not now, or never. You might as well just rule it out because there's no way I, Raphael Michelson Queen, will become one of them. Raphael blurted in a cold tone. The change that transpired was very obvious, and Yvonne was about to retort to his words when Raphael's voice rang. I will never become like father. A broken bar. Father sat on those seats, and he sold his soul to the devil. There's no way I will be like him. Raphael angrily stood from his seat and dashed towards the staircase. He had moved so fast that before Yvonne could even speak, there was a door slam coming from his room. Sire, broken bar. This is all for your sake, Raphael, Yvonne stated. You will need all the help you can get when it's time, and I'm not sure that I will be able to help when the dark day arrives. After those words left Yvonne's mouth, she closed her eyes, and streams of tears rolled from her eyes. A broken bar. Meanwhile, in the most prestigious house and one of the most heavily guarded places in the world, a broken bar, the White House, 7 figures donned in black and white sat around a table with a grim look all on their faces. The 7 of them eyes were glued to the paper in front of them, and after they had done through the paper, one of them spoke. Once we have all those around him wiped out, I believe we all know the next phase from here, said the man with a goatee, and after he spoke, there was a nod from the others around the table. At the headline of the paper in front of the 7 of them, they were one name that their eyes were fixed on the whole time. A Michelson Queen. Inside one of the houses in Dale City, Aurora sat on the bed with her leg crossed with one another while her eyes were fixed on the person in front of her. You know, when Gus said you have never missed a day of training in your life, I didn't believe it, but now I do, said Aurora with a smile on her face. Another month had passed, making it 2 months since Raphael and Aurora began working on that system, and if there was one thing they were able to achieve apart from creating 2 system capsules during those days was they became closer than ever. I'm impressed, you know, Aurora said, and then drank from the cup of tea in her hand. As Aurora continued to stare at him as Raphael continued with his training session, no words left his mouth. To Raphael, there was time for everything. Even though he was busier than he ever was during these past 2 months, he still didn't forget to drill himself day and night. It was his dedicated effort that pushed him from an A-rank metahuman with 61,060 power grading to 73,879 power grading. Suddenly, Aurora stood from the bed, still donned in her nightgown from just waking up a few hours ago. Aurora made her way to Raphael. Raphael had switched to push-ups, and he was about to go for the 100th push-up when he felt a load on his back. Raphael adjusted his body, and once he had Aurora sitting crossed-legged on his back, he continued on the push-up. 101, 102. This wasn't the first time Aurora was sitting on his back during his training session. She had been involved, in fact waiting for him to get into his position, so she would get on him. 111, Raphael muttered. A few minutes passed, and once Raphael arrived at 500 push, Aurora moved away from him. Raphael also stood from the ground. He could tell that Aurora had her eyes on him, but he didn't turn towards her until he had a towel in his hand. If you continue to stare at me like that, I'm going to think you're in love with me, said Raphael with a smile on his face. Saying Raphael had the physique of a god was no exaggeration, as he was well built. The sweat which then around his body somehow caused Aurora's body to tingle, but, after Raphael spoke, she took a deep breath and said, "What if I was? That would be sad, don't you think? After all, I'm your best friend, man. You wouldn't want to hurt your friend, right?" Raphael responded. Once Elisa was brought into the conversation, the expression on Aurora's face changed very quickly. Even though she was able to revert the expression on her face, Raphael still noticed the change in the change. "I will never do something that will hurt Elisa," said Aurora with her hands clenched into a tight fists. Raphael smirked. "Are you sure about that? Because to me, it seems like you want some of this," Raphael said. Aurora bit her lower lips and then clenched both of her hands into a tight fists. However, after a few seconds, she loosened her grip, and then a smile appeared on her face. "Who are you trying to fool, Raphael?" said Aurora as she walked towards Raphael. "If there's one thing I learned about you in the past month is whenever the circumstance isn't going the way you want it, you tend to want to break the bond with it." As only a few inches were separating the both of them, Aurora folded her hand across her chest. "In this case, it appears that you're the one who has taken a liking to me, but you want to break that bond by making me feel bad, so I will leave here on bad terms with you." Aurora spoke with a sneer on her face. Gus, who was on its perch, nodded its head repeatedly after Aurora spoke. For Gus, Aurora couldn't be more accurate, as that was the intention Raphael had, though it was still doubted whether he liked her or not. But Gus was certain that Raphael wanted her out. However, much to Aurora's surprise, a few seconds after which she spoke, Raphael's lips suddenly curved inwardly. He raised her chin up. "It seems to me like you overestimate yourself, Aurora. If I wanted to break all this I wouldn't go through the corner. Instead I will tell you directly," Raphael replied. "Oh really?" Aurora sneered, and after a nod came from Raphael, she spoke. "So, you mean that you don't like me, and you just decided to utter those words for the fun of it? You have no intention on me?" Raphael nodded his head repeatedly. "Then if I kiss you, it won't mean anything to you," said Aurora. Raphael's eyes twitched. He was about to retort to what had just been said when felt lips pressed against his eyes. The instant the contact was made, Raphael's eyes widened. He was caught by surprise, and before he could even comprehend what was happening, the room door was suddenly pushed. Yvonne stepped into the room, and she had only just taken one step into the room when she saw Raphael and Yvonne. Aurora pulled out of the kiss immediately, with shock evident on her face. She wasn't shocked by Yvonne barging into the room, but by the action which she herself made. "What do you?" Before Yvonne would get the rest of the words out of her mouth, Aurora rushed past her. Yvonne then moved her gaze away from the fleeing Aurora to Raphael. She shook her head, before closing the room door. Meanwhile, Raphael remained in position. There was neither a smile nor a frown on his face. He turned towards the mirror and said, "This has to end," Raphael blurted. Gus nodded his head. "I agree, but I don't actually think it's your fault completely. From what I've read in books, kids of your age are usually horny, useless, and most have no idea what it is they are doing," said Gus. "I thought you were an exception, but as it turns out, you're not. You also think with your dick, so it's understandable." If eyes could kill, there was no doubt that Gus would have died over and over again. From how it was been glared at by Raphael, the hairs around Gus's body became erect as it felt dangerous in the air, and before Raphael would launch at it, Gus wasted no time and quickly it fell out of the room. "Bastard," Raphael blurted. However, while Raphael hated to admit it, there was indeed some truth in what Gus said. He had been thinking with his lower pant for the past few days, or else how could he have been close to Aurora that much? Raphael heaved a deep breath and then walked to the bathroom. Now that it had arrived at this point he knew what had to be done. Meanwhile, after Aurora headed out of the room, she was about to leave the house, when Yvonne appeared in front of her. "Hold on, Aurora," Yvonne said with a motherly gaze. "No, I'm sorry Yvonne, but I can't. I have betrayed my best friend's trust," Aurora blurted. There were streams of tears dripping out of her eyes, and as she didn't attempt to withdraw the tears, they kept flowing out of her eyes. "An updates are shaky because of my exams, sigh. 2 days passed since Yvonne had a talk with Aurora regarding the statement which she made, and after all was said, Aurora agreed that taking a step back was necessary. "Raphael, will you hurry up? We are already late." Yvonne's voice sounded from the living room. She shook her head and then moved her gaze to Aurora. "You look very pretty," said Yvonne with a smile on her face, donned in a blue long-slit gown. Aurora certainly looked astonishing. Her curvaceous figure was in the reveal and adding to that beautiful face. Yvonne wasn't exaggerating when she said a broken bar very pretty. "Thank you, Yvonne," Aurora replied with neither a smile nor a frown on her face. However, as Yvonne saw the demeanor at which Aurora had around her, She moved towards her soon after. "I know, you want to leave this place quickly, because of what's happening between you two, but don't you think avoiding it will only cause more problems?" Yvonne said. "The both of you attend the same academy, and he is with your best friend. There's really no way you will be able to avoid him forever. As much as I hate the scandal going on between you two, I have seen the way he looks at you, and I know you're not the only one who is in a broken bar. Raphael is also dealing with the same issue, but he's more capable of dealing with it, like he would say, turning off his emotion. The kid has always been like that. But if you want to move on, you will learn to sit your ass down." And putting this to the ground, Aurora's hands were clenched into tight fists as Yvonne spoke to her. She had been able to keep a straight face since when she came to the living room, but once Yvonne started the lecture, she found herself unable to keep that expression. "I disagree," Aurora suddenly spoke. "I'm able to avoid him forever, and that's exactly what I will do. Broken bar these past few days were a big mistake. I should have never come here," said Aurora. Aurora turned towards Yvonne. "I apologize, Yvonne, but I will never be able to forgive myself if something were to happen to Lisa's relationship with him because of me. Once the annual Dale City party is over, I will not have anything to do with him again, and likewise, would he have something to do with me," said Aurora. Yvonne took a deep breath. She could see the resolve in Aurora, and after giving it some thought, she nodded her head. The least she could do was offer her own advice, and if thereafter it wasn't adhered to, she would only be crossing some boundary by being persistent. Most would think 2 months wasn't a long time to develop this sort of relationship, but when the both of them had that sort of dynamic, understanding, and appreciation of each other, it wasn't. Aurora was perhaps the most hard-working person Raphael knew apart from himself. As the sound of footsteps came from the staircase, Aurora and Yvonne turned towards the area immediately. The pace at which Raphael moved from the staircase to the living room was slow and yet steady, but as his figure emerged in front of Yvonne and Aurora, there was a brief change of expression from them. "Stunning, handsome in a very understated way," Yvonne blurted as she seized Raphael from head to toe. The brown hair, black fitted suit with rippling quality, as well as the latent power that would make anyone who stood beside him feel inferior in every positive way. A light smile hung on Yvonne's face. She could tell that Raphael wasn't excluding that demeanor intentionally, but instead, he was born with it. "The pride of the Mikkelsen family, shall we?" Raphael muttered. Yvonne responded by wrapping her hand around his arm, and the both of them headed toward the door. As for Aurora, after taking a glance at Raphael, she lowered her head immediately. It was only then raised once he began moving. Aurora heaved a deep breath. She was about to move when Gus appeared in front of her. "Shall we?" Aurora had only just spoken when Gus flew towards her head. Once the appropriate position on her head was found, Gus let out a hiss. "This is ridiculous, Gus. How am I supposed to go to a party with you sitting on my head?" said Aurora. "You have got to be kidding, Gus." As Gus didn't seem to have the slightest bit of leaving where it was, Aurora blurted, "Weren't you just impressed with my talents a few days ago? How come it went from that to this?" Aurora exclaimed. In response to her, Gus let out a long hiss that prompted Aurora to take a deep breath before then heading toward his door. Meanwhile, Dale City was having the biggest event of the year. The city was flocking with men and women wearing perhaps the best clothes that were in the wardrobe, and their faces were all full of smiles. The evening sun cast a long shadow on the ground, the music in the surrounding, and each person held on to someone dancing as though they had no worries of any kind, and indeed, they had no worries. The city was in safe hands. The production, as well as the development of the city, was growing at an insane rate. Saying the city was at its prime was accurate. Cheers, glasses were being hit together, and the majority of the people in Dale City were wrecked with alcohol. However, as a youth accompanied by 2 women, one on his right and the other on his left, everyone at the party paused their steps, and while the women were standing in front of their partners, they seized the dashing youth from head to toe, and none of them were able to hide that fire in their eyes. Blessed with both power and authority, as well as a face and body that would put any being to shame, Raphael stood with his hand placed in his pocket. "Sir, Raphael, I didn't expect you to be attending this event, Dennis exclaimed. To save himself some face, Dennis didn't bother extending his hand for a handshake once he got to Raphael, and instead, he gave him a low bow. Raphael completely ignored Dennis's greeting by walking past him. It wasn't like Dennis didn't anticipate the response from Raphael, he did, and as Raphael moved away from him, he flashed a rough smile at Yvonne. Yvonne responded with a smile of her own, before then walking towards Raphael. You know the deal, right? Said Yvonne as she got to Raphael. Raphael nodded his head. I stay here for 30 minutes and get the key to the store back, Raphael responded. There was neither a smile nor a frown on his face as he uttered those words, but Yvonne, who saw the look on him, rolled her eyes at him, before then walking away. Enjoy yourself, you know. All work, no play makes one a loser, Yvonne blurted from afar. Raphael took hold of the glass of wine from the table and then drank from it. Careful, a soft feminine voice suddenly rang out. Raphael had gulped the entire content that was in the glass at once, and as he heard a voice, he lowered the glass and stared at the woman in front of him. I see you can talk to me now. I assumed you were going to ignore me forever, said Raphael with a smirk on his face. He then grabbed the other glass of wine that was on the table and was about to take another sip when Aurora spoke. Are you drinking because you feel guilty about how you feel toward me? Aurora asked. As those words went through Raphael, his eyebrows furrowed, and then he stared at Aurora in a way that made her question herself. Don't fool yourself, Aurora. I have no such thought towards you, Raphael said. This isn't alcoholic. Meanwhile, as Raphael and Aurora stood in front of one another, they soon became the focus of mention for the people at the party. A majority of the people in the area had eyes on both of them, exchanging theories of all sorts among themselves. I guess it's true, the both of them are in a relationship. Sire Broken Bar, what a pity. The most eligible youth in the city has been plucked, and I had great plans for him. You know, from what I am being told, Raphael and Aurora have yet to consummate, so we can still swoop in, and bam, we get pregnant with his child. After the woman in heavy makeup spoke, it was no surprise that none of the people around her disagreed with what was said. Raphael was more akin to a priceless gem in their eyes, and anyone who had him was forever in luck. Meanwhile, as Raphael stared at his wristwatch, there was a flick of joy on his face. He had spent 30 minutes here and was now able to get back to the store. I heard you're leaving for the academy tonight, Raphael asked, and as Aurora nodded her head, he spoke. Best of luck then, said Raphael, as Raphael then took a step towards the exit of the party. Aurora spoke. Raphael, he paused. Take care of yourself, Aurora said, and most especially, beware of Dennis and Danilo. I don't know what the both of them are up to, but from what I can, they are willing to do anything, just to have you in the political field, Aurora said. Raphael's eyes flickered with killing intent. Then, I won't be so polite with them. With that said, Raphael moved towards the exit. Seeing him leave, the party brought forth a frown from the majority of the women's faces, as they had just gone to change into their most seductive outfits, while also adding extra makeup. However, while the women were disappointed with Raphael leaving the party, a smile hung on Dennis and Danilo's faces. We have 3 hours and the drug will begin its effect, said Dennis with a sadistic smile on his face. Yes, brother, but this is also where the important part of it starts. We need to handle this perfectly, or else we may not get any other chance like this. Danilo spoke. A nod came from Dennis as he heard his brother, and as if they could read each other's minds, they moved their gaze to Aurora, who was standing in one corner with a drink in her hand. As Raphael left the party, he returned to the store immediately, and quickly work started right after. Once the encapsulator is completed, let me know, Gus, said Raphael. He then removed the wear he was on and began walking towards the staircase. Each step taken was slow, but for some reason, it hit the duo in the room staring at him. Once Raphael was no longer in view, Roy turned towards Gus, and before he would speak, Gus appeared to know what he was going to ask. Don't ask me, I have no idea what's wrong with him. Roy pondered for a bit before then moving his gaze toward the encapsulator machine. A smile then hung on his face, as he recalled the process they engaged in before arriving at this stage in the capsule. Before the system became a capsule that would be taken in, it went through several processes of reaction as well as grinding. The codes of the simulator were involved, and the dynamics, the principle of airflow, as well as other sequences that were used in creating the capsule would bring a smile to anyone who witnessed it. Sir, Raphael is a wizard at this game, Roy blurted. If there was a statement that was widely accepted all over, then it had to be Raphael's horrifying talent in this field. Gus nodded his head repeatedly. What's scarier is that he had no teacher, everything he learned was by himself. I have no idea how it does it, but his intellect isn't on the human or even robot standard, Roy said, almost like he is the son of a god or something. A broken bar. There was a brief change of expression from Gus after Roy spoke. Even though the expression disappeared as soon as it emerged, it still remained that Gus reacted to what was said by Roy. Let's start working on the shell. Before the encapsulator is completed, we should at least have the shell ready, said Gus. Roy moved quickly, however, even though the topic of discussion was changed, he still wasn't able to get over the fact that Raphael was our broken bar monster. Meanwhile, as Roy and Gus began working on the shell, Raphael was on the upper floor of the store. Apart from his house, the upper floor of the store was where Raphael spent most of his time, and it was off-limit to anyone except himself. Raphael kept the upper floor all to himself. That despite how close he was to Gus, he had never allowed Gus to see how the upper floor of the store looked, or what was there. A broken bar, and unlike what was usually thought of as the upper floor, it was completely the opposite. The floor was completely dark, and saying it was dark as the shades of the night was no exaggeration. Having closed all areas that would enable light from penetrating into the area, and soundproofing the room, Raphael also didn't equip the floor with any tools, gadgets, or even furniture. The floor was completely empty. However, as creepy as the place, it was Raphael's favorite place to be in. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Raphael folded his hand across while his eyes were closed shut. Broken bar. He took deep breaths about every 5 minutes, and after about 30 minutes, his eyes sprang open. The peace of mind that he received in here was unrivaled, and even Gus referred that it was Raphael's biggest tragedy. It was more like a reboot, and after Raphael opened his eyes, he stood from the ground. He stretched his body gently and was about to move from where he was when his body trembled violently. Raphael's eyes twitched, as he felt the change in his body. He wanted to move from where he was, but not to talk of walking. He wasn't able to move a muscle of his body. Those words had only left Raphael's mouth when he stumbled to the floor. Thud. Oh shit, Raphael blurted, unbeknownst to Raphael. A few seconds after he stumbled to the floor, there was a knock at the door of the store. The person at the entrance was none other than Aurora, and once the door of the store was open to her, she moved towards the working area immediately. Where is Raphael? Asked Aurora as she stared at her surroundings. Gus seized Aurora from head to toe, before moving its gaze towards the staircase. Aurora knitted her brows and then walked towards the staircase. Are you sure, sir, Raphael would want her there? Roy asked as he watched Aurora head towards the upper floor. He won't, Gus replied. Roy raised an eyebrow upon Gus's response. Then why did you tell her to go there? This time around, Gus let out a long hiss before then saying, where did you get that from? All I did was turn towards the stairs. I said nothing, Gus blurted. An eye roll came from Roy, which then led to Gus saying, and let's say I did. Isn't it going to be fun? A broken bar. What's life without a bit of drama, said Gus. There was clearly an underlying meaning to what Gus said. However, Roy had no idea what it was, but whatever happened was going to determine what type of drama it would be. The last person to head up to the stairs to see Raphael was scolded intensively. A broken bar. Raphael held nothing back until he made that person question the purpose of his existence, and who knows what sort of fate would befall Aurora. A broken bar. Aurora quickened her pace as she got to the staircase, and after a few seconds, she arrived at the upper floor. Arriving at the upper floor, a dumbfounded expression emerged on Aurora's face. She stared at the dark area, and her eyes twitched, as dark as shades of the night. Indeed, this was nothing like the image she had of the upper floor after hearing so much about it from Gus and Roy. But, after a few seconds, Aurora took a deep breath and then spoke. "Raphael, where are you?" Aurora asked. Aurora paused, and as there was no response after a while, she spoke in a louder tone. "Raphael, I'm here to get the border broken bar. I will be leaving for the academy in the next hour, so I need to have it," said Aurora. Apart from the upper floor being completely empty and soundproof, it was also blocked off all signals. As Aurora received no response from the floor yet again, she knitted her brows and was about to turn around when she felt a movement a few meters away from her. Then, with her hand clenched into a tight fist just in case, Aurora moved gently. However, as she moved a few steps, she suddenly came in contact with a force that almost caused her to stumble to the ground. "Why are you blind, or can't you see someone is here?" Raphael's painful voice rang out. Aurora was about to regain her composure, and as she heard Raphael's voice, she slowly moved her gaze downward, before then crouching gently. "Why are you laying on the ground?" Aurora abruptly paused. "You know what, it's none of the business. I need the board, so hand it over," said Aurora. "I don't have it with me right now," Raphael responded. "Where broken bar? Where is it?" Raphael was about to respond when he felt someone touching his thigh. His eyes twitched, and then he said, "What the hell are you doing, Aurora?" Raphael spoke in a loud voice as the touch was very improper. He was experiencing weakness in almost all parts of his body, and the last thing he wanted was to be touched. "Yeah, broken bar," Aurora stuttered. "I don't know," she exclaimed. Aurora removed her hand, which was on Raphael's thigh, then placed it on her head. She gripped her hair tight, as her cheeks reddened. For some reason, Aurora felt some burning desires igniting through her body, and as she tried to suppress the vile thought, it only got harder. At that moment, the blood in her body was boiling while her brain was filled with desire, a burning desire that if it was vented out, it would cause damage to her body. Aurora found herself losing her rationality, and as her hand mistakenly came in contact with Raphael, the expression on her face changed quickly. However, trying as much as to control themselves, Aurora attempted to move backward, but while that was the intention she had, it wasn't the move she made. "What Aurora broken bar? Stop!" Raphael exclaimed. It was first his shirt that was ripped apart, and before he could even comprehend the situation, his lower pant was gotten rid of as well. "Yeah, broken bar. I need a broken bar." Aurora bit her cherry lips hard. She was screaming inwardly to back the hell away from what she was doing, but her body refused to comply with her request. "Aurora, have you gone insane? Let me go, and get the hell out of far." Broken bar. Before Raphael would utter the remaining words, his lips were immediately sealed. Yeah, broken bar. I need a broken bar." Aurora bit her cherry lips hard. She was screaming inwardly to back the hell away from what she was doing, but her body refused to comply with her request. "Aurora, have you gone insane? Let me go, and get the hell out of far." Broken bar. Before Raphael would utter the remaining words, his lips were immediately sealed. Raphael's eyes widened with shock well evident in them. This wasn't the first time he was kissing a woman, but this was a very different experience. Raphael was powerless in this case. He lost all ability to resist and he could only watch as Aurora nibbled and sucked his lips in a frantic manner. A painful groan escaped Raphael's mouth, as Aurora bit his lower lips. "Who did this to you?" Raphael exclaimed. Raphael already saw the inkling, and he knew that the current Aurora had lost all reason. However, before they crossed the real boundaries, Raphael attempted to get rid of Aurora. "You need to wake the hell up, Aurora. What the hell are you doing?" Seeing Aurora ripping apart the clothes she was wearing, Raphael's loud voice rang out. Aurora was no professional at this, but the way she stripped herself naked within seconds certainly looked like she was, and beautiful to the extreme. Raphael had seen Aurora with little clothing on, and even though it was a sight to behold, it was nothing compared to what was in front of him. Whether it was the smooth, snow-white skin, the long leg, or the devil-like body that was outlined, barely glancing at her in this state. Lust could break out immediately. Why? Raphael's abruptly paused as he felt a strong grip around his manhood. His eyes rolled back and forth instantly. Even though he was against what was occurring, it wasn't like he could control that region. Aurora's soft hand coming in contact with his manhood sent his body tingling, and Raphael's body soon trembled slightly, as he then saw Aurora raising her body gently, and then aligning his manhood to her entrance. Terror swept through Raphael's body. They had arrived at the point of no return. "Oh Tilda," Raphael's soft voice sounded as he felt his manhood penetrating into Aurora's sacred region. The feeling of Aurora's tight wall clenching around Raphael's manhood caused his body to tremble violently. It was so tight in there, and as Aurora knowingly took in everything all at once, Raphael experienced a sensation like no other. Tilda. However, the same couldn't be said for the woman who was on top of his body. Aurora rubbed her hand across her hair, and the expression on her face changed greatly, as she felt the monster that just penetrated into her body. She painfully screeched a second after, and as drops of blood slowly flowed from her region, tears gathered around her eyes. "It's so big," said Aurora, as tears continued to gather. The pain she felt from Raphael's manhood plowing into her was as if a baseball bat rammed into her. "Pa pa pa pa," called Aurora excited, but while the pain she experienced was intense, the pleasure which coursed through her body was phenomenal, to say the least. It sent her body into a heightened state of pleasure, and unknowingly she began to slam her body onto Raphael. Pa 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 pa. Raphael's eyes were closed shut. The feeling was just so blissful that he lost control of himself for a moment there, as Raphael regained his composure. He shook his head repeatedly. "Damn, who the hell did this to you?" The question was just directed at Aurora but also at himself, as there was a high chance that the person who put Aurora in this state was also the one who made him immobilized. Raphael's thoughts were split into two. He pondered about who it was that could render both of them in this shape, while also dealing with the powerful slam he was receiving from Aurora. "Ah, so good." Aurora licked her lips, as she felt nothing but excitement from Raphael's cock plunging her. Unlike Raphael, who was still in a rational manner, Aurora had lost all thinking, and the only thing that mattered was quenching the heat she was experiencing all over her body. The volume of Aurora's moans increased, and so did its intensity. With Raphael, there was no such thing as the G-spot. Every stroke sent an electrifying sensation around her body. So good. Raphael had only just received yet another powerful slam from Aurora when he felt her taking hold of his hand and then placing it on her boobs. She seemed to be telling him to play with them, but the state Raphael had himself in prevented him from toying around them. Both bosoms were so close to him, and at the same time, they seemed far away. Tilda. Aurora slowly leaned towards Raphael, tangling her fingers tightly into his hair, pulling his mouth roughly against hers, mashing his lips into hers, and the speed of her thrust increased. In less than 2 minutes after the kiss, Aurora slowly separated herself from him. Her body trembled violently as she could feel something coming from her body. Unknowingly, she tightened her inner walls, squeezing Raphael's cock for all it was worth. Oh, Raphael's mouth opened wide so that an egg could fit inside, and it wasn't even up to a second after which his mouth and a scream erupted from Aurora. Tilda, it's coming. Aurora's body jerked on top of Raphael. She attacked Raphael's lips immediately, as an orgasm ripped through her body. As Aurora was sent into eternal bliss from that orgasm, Raphael was experienced one of his own. Aurora stiffened like a board and went silent. About 10 seconds later she started to shake uncontrollably, her tits undulating in beautiful ripples, and as the throbbing from Raphael's cock stopped, she screamed, "Oh my God!" Luckily, the entire floor was soundproof by some of the best tools in the world, or else the entire neighborhood would have gotten wind of the scream that came from Aurora. Tilda. Slowly, Raphael's eyelids started to lift open, and his vision started to return. His body was slightly sore and his head felt heavy. As Raphael lifted himself off the ground, he placed a hand on his head. "What the hell happened?" Raphael muttered. "Light on." That was probably his worst decision of the week, and as the light was turned on, Raphael moved his gaze to his left, only to receive the shock of his life. Laying beside him was the naked Aurora. She was laying there, tits in the reveal and her sacred region. The stark naked Aurora around caused Raphael's heart to skip a bit, and as he saw the bloodstains on the ground, he was immediately disarrayed, quite staring. "You have already seen enough," said Aurora. Her voice was cold, and likewise was the expression on her face. Aurora had woken up a few minutes ago, and she was about to leave the room after organizing her thought when Raphael woke up. Aurora grinded her teeth and then bit her lower lips. Even though she was able to recall a bit of what happened yesterday, she was still very furious by the whole escapade that occurred between them. "No need to blame yourself. This was all my fault, I know," Raphael responded to Aurora. It would be a lie to say that Aurora wasn't left dumbfounded by the response she just received from Raphael. Her mouth opened slightly. She wanted to speak, but then shook her head. "Yes, you're right." Although she knew that the action yesterday was all her fault, when she saw Raphael currently having such upright behavior, she clenched her hand into a tight fist. Slowly, Aurora stood from the ground and then grabbed her clothes. Aurora of yesterday morning would have opposed to dressing in front of him, but after all that had transpired between them, she found no reason to. Then, ignoring Raphael's eyes that kept seizing her from head to toe, Aurora wore her fitting gown and gently packed her hair aside. Once Aurora was fully clothed, she turned towards Raphael, and as her eyes came in contact with that object of his, the expression on her face couldn't help but change. Aurora took a deep breath. "Let me make myself clear to you. I don't want you to feel guilty, or think you need to take responsibility, and I hope this doesn't spread out." "This never happened," Aurora exclaimed. "Also, you have Eliza, so, don't get any wrong idea about us. This is a blunder from my end, and I will continue to regret it for the rest of my life." Aurora gnashed her teeth and said the last few words. Raphael didn't seem to have any problem with any of what Aurora said. He stood from the ground. "I agree, this shouldn't have happened, but, I don't believe hiding it from Eliza is the right thing to do. You might be able to stomach it, but I don't believe I'm capable of such. You either tell her about what happened or I let her know," said Raphael. Aurora's eyebrows furrowed. "Fine, I will let her know myself. The board is on the table downstairs. I believe you have somewhere you must be," Raphael said. Shortly after Aurora left the store, Raphael took gentle steps and made his way to the lower floor. There was curiosity evident from both Roy and Gus as they stared at Raphael. Both of them had seen Aurora barge out angrily a few seconds ago, and a moment later, Raphael was out with a similar expression on. "Did the both of you do it?" Gus blurted. It was unable to hold the urge to figure out what exactly happened on the upper floor. However, Raphael acted as though he had none of what was said. Raphael turned towards the screen in the middle of the store. "Lexi, I want you to put on the footage of everything that occurred at the party last night." There was no surprise that less than a minute after Raphael gave his request, the clip of the party was displayed on the screen. "I don't have the luxury to watch all this," said Raphael. "Scan the whole event, and highlight only the part one was mentioned." Apparently, there was no particular difference between his request and the previous ones. As Raphael only attended the party as of later, he was still the subject of conversation at the party. "You know what? Does any skeptical activity occur in the party relating to myself or Aurora?" Raphael said, with a stern look on his face. The response wasn't as quick as the rest, but once the screen changed, and Raphael saw what was being displayed, his lips curved inwardly. "I will kill both of them." What followed after those words were the slam of the exit door in the store. Meanwhile, Gus and Roy watched as Aurora and Raphael's drink was tampered with at the party, and there was a slight change in their expression. Though the puzzle had yet to be deciphered, they were getting close to understanding what happened at the party. "Yup, I was right, the both of them did it," Gus exclaimed. After uttering those words, Gus turned towards Roy, and while the exact words left his mouth, it caused Roy to heave a deep breath, before then stretching his hand out. "Here it is, you won the bet," Roy said, and then handed Gus a blue coupon. Unbeknownst to Raphael, the show he and Aurora had put up the past few months caused Roy and Gus to make a bet on them, and after days of will it happened or not, Gus finally won the bet. As Gus saw the coupon on the table, his eyes immediately flickered with joy. This was no ordinary coupon. With this, you could get whatever organ you want in the factory. While Gus continued to stare at the coupon like it was the most precious thing in the world, Raphael raced towards Dennis and Danilo's house. Apparently, after Raphael had asked if whether or not any skeptical activity occurred at the party, it was the image of Dennis and Danilo that was first shown, and as if that weren't upsetting enough seeing both of them tampering with his and Aurora's drink, Raphael was very furious. At the moment, he blamed himself for losing concentration and allowing his drink to be tampered with. It was merely a moment of distraction, but during that loss of concentration, the waitress ordered Dennis, and Danilo was able to sprinkle the white content into his drink. The same had also happened to Aurora, but while Raphael's drink caused him to experience complete weakness in every part of his body, Aurora was made to perform the unthinkable. Vile bastard, shame, going to the length of using aphrodisiac on their own person, Raphael exclaimed. Bang! A few seconds later and Raphael kicked Dennis and Danilo's house door open. There was killing intent excluding after his body, and after seizing the room all over, he headed to the stairs immediately. Bang! Each door was slammed open, and after going through all the room, Raphael arrived back in the living room. He bit his lower lips, while also clenching his hand into a tight fist. Suddenly, Raphael raised an eyebrow as he saw the paper on the desk. He moved towards the desk quickly and took hold of the paper. If you're reading this, then it must mean the deed has been done. Ha ha ha, Raphael said, I will be expecting the end product of your copulation with Aurora, I mean a child, obviously. Anyway, don't bother to search for us because we are far gone. I also welcome you to the Holmes family, and yeah, once you clock 17, you will be eligible to seat with the head of the table. Goodbye Raphael, have a wonderful day broken bar until we meet again. Raphael shredded the paper after he was done reading it. There was rage written all over Raphael, and as he stood in the room, he took his anger out on the surrounding. It was first a floor crack, then a few seconds later, the room he was in began to distort, and holding nothing back, it took seconds and Raphael reduced the second-story bungalow to nothing. What the hell? Those who were outside of the house were extremely startled as they witnessed the house collapse right in front of them. It all occurred so fast that before any one of them could comprehend what had happened, the house was totally ruined. However, seeing Raphael standing in the middle of the collapsed house, they swallowed whatever it was they were about to say, and then moved their gaze away from the house. They were still very much curious about why Raphael was standing there or why he demolished the house, but none of them dare utter any words. Raphael, Queen, a letter from the Academy. The expression on Raphael's face was still grim when he heard that voice. Slowly, he turned, and as he saw the mailman standing in front of him, Raphael gently stretched out his hand. Once the mail was received by Raphael, the mailman bowed gently and then turned around. Amidst the gaze in the surrounding, Raphael opened the mail, and as he read the content of the letter, Raphael's let out a rather demonic smile. New mission. Whether it was the demonic smile or the aura which was excluded from his body, there was no doubt that the person Raphael was coming for was in for hell. Hey guys, at this point, I'm just going to ask a broken bar, what will it take to get a magic castle, Gakapan, or spacecraft? If there is, kindly let me know because I will definitely work toward it. The reason is simple. You might assume I'm just being greedy, but it isn't so. The benefits of those 3 gifts are massive. It gives exposure in the sense that whenever a reader gives any of that 3 gifts, a 4:8 seconds notification appears on the screen of every reader on Webnovel, and on this platform, that is everything. Those 4 to 8 seconds of exposure all over the world can change any book's life. I enjoy writing this book a lot, and the dream is to have every reader aware of this book. I would have loved to give myself one of those, but, between me and you, I have nothing lol. So, I would really appreciate it if you can aid me one way or the other. Portland City. The city was also among the undeveloped non-meta-human communities. However, when compared to Dale City, Portland was a much better place. Years ago, it was rumored that the mayor of the city had somehow rescued a meta-human from the Hero League, and ever since then, the city received massive growth, unlike the rest. "Did you find out where he went?" Raphael asked as soon as Gus appeared on his shoulder. Responding to Raphael, Gus shook his head several times. "Even if it means searching through every household in this town, find that son of a bitch for me," Raphael exclaimed. The usual Gus might have chosen to fool around before then going on with Raphael's wishes, but at the moment, it knew better than to play games with Raphael. As Raphael was in no mood for that, the only focus at hand wasn't the system, but the assignment he was given by the academy. Exactly 3 hours ago, Raphael received a letter saying he was to capture a former student, who chose to betray the academy by working for the Heroes League. Jake Harper was the morgue name, and his last scene was in Portland City. The distance between Dale City and Portland City was only a few minutes, and it was majorly the reason why Raphael was assigned the mission. And as soon as Raphael stepped into the city, the hunt for Jake Harper began. Raphael paid little attention to the ability of the man, and all that mattered was the face in the letter and the whereabouts. "Have you seen this man?" Standing before a counter, Raphael spoke, as the man behind the counter then laid eyes on the picture at which he has been shown. There was a hesitant look on his face. The expression drifted off a second after it appeared, but Raphael, who had eyes fixed on the man in case of any foul play, noticed the change instantly. "My broken bar, I haven't seen him before," said the man. "Are you sure?" Raphael asked, and as the man nodded his head at him repeatedly, his lips curved inwardly, Raphael slowly turned around. He clenched his hand into a fist, then turned towards the man, with his eyebrows were furrowed while the expression on his face screamed chaos. The man's first thought was to flee the hell away from where he was, but as he tried to move from where he was, he soon realized that he was unable to move a muscle, completely immobilized, a broken bar while Raphael hadn't laid a single touch on him, merely coming in contact with that bloodshot, emotionless eyes. The man skipped multiple heartbeats, his pant became soaked very quickly, and as if the pressure he was experiencing wasn't enough, Raphael stretched his hand into the counter and pulled him out. Thud. Raphael slammed the man's body to the ground heavily, then, ignoring the gaze he was receiving from the people in the surrounding, he bent gently, trailing his hand across the man's face. "Listen attentively," Raphael exclaimed. "I hate liars dearly, and the fact that you lied before me means that you're guaranteed to die." Raphael paused. "But, your decision from here will decide what sort of death you will get. Will it be a cruel and horrible death, or would it be a quick one? It's up to you." A demonic smile hung on Raphael's face afterward. The man shook as those cold and yet decisive words were spoken to him. As Raphael squeezed his face, the trembling stopped, and removing his hand, the skin on his forehead separated as well. "He's a meta-human, run." To the people of Portland City, the stunt Raphael had just pulled could only mean one thing after the emergence of superpowers. He was a meta-human, a broken bar, and a very powerful one at those. Those who intended to go support the man earlier immediately fled as though their lives depended on it. And within seconds, the previously crowded area was soon void of people. "This is merely the tip of the iceberg when compared to what I will do to you," said Raphael. "Now, where is this man?" Jake's picture then appeared before the man. The man gulped. There was no longer sweat around his forehead, and instead, it was now replaced by blood. The blood moved across his face, and it took seconds for him to have his face covered in blood. "Where is he?" Raphael gripped onto the man's face and then slammed his head on the floor. Bang! It was first the sound of collision between the man's head and the floor, and what came next was multiple cracks appearing beneath where the man's head was, with blood splattering out of his mouth soon after. "Okay then, since you won't talk, then a broken bar." Before Raphael would make a move, he suddenly spoke. "Here broken bar, here broken bar," the man stuttered. He pointed his hand into the far distance, and as he seemed to finally want to get the words out of his mouth, his eyes suddenly shut close. Seeing the lifeless man, Raphael knitted his brows. How can he be so weak? Raphael mumbled. It was just a slam, sire. Broken bar so pathetic. Raphael spat on the man's corpse, and then lifted himself off the ground. Truthfully, it wasn't that the man was extremely weak. In fact, he was one of the most muscular and well-built men in the city, but before Raphael, the disparity was massive. Saying he was akin to a child was very accurate. Raphael soon turned towards the area that the man had been pointing at, and as Gus came onto his shoulder, whispering, a sly smile appeared on his face. The mayor is about to welcome Raphael Queen into his household then, said Raphael. Gus had only just laid eyes on the corpse that was beside it when Raphael spoke. The expression on its face remained the same, but while no words escaped Gus's mouth, it didn't stop Gus from praying to the gods that Jake, or whatever his name was, didn't fall into Raphael's hand. It was rare for Raphael to get into this stage, but once he did, he might as well be called Devil's favorite child. He. Raphael suddenly chuckled and, with his hand placed behind his back, he walked gently to the mayor's mansion. How may I help you, sir? Said the woman at the gate of the mansion. Her voice was soft, and as she stared at Raphael, there was a noble look on her face, almost as though she were aware of his status. Raphael, however, had the usual expression on his face. I want this man, Raphael said, and then showed Jake's picture to the woman, the same manner in which the man from the counter reacted when he laid eyes on the picture also emerged from the woman. I haven't seen him here, the woman responded, but, young man, I must warn you, whatever it is you want this man for, it best you forget it. The man is a monster, and only death befalls those who seek for him, she added. Nonetheless, after hearing all that was said, the look on Raphael's face didn't change in the slightest. He was least concerned about those who had died in the cause of search for Jake, and ignoring the woman, he moved past her very quickly. Why were broken bar? The woman stuttered as she was Raphael making his way to the mansion. She rushed towards him quickly. Where do you think you're going to, young man? Since you said you haven't seen him, you wouldn't mind me scouring for him here, right? Raphael said. The woman's eyes twitched from the response she had just received. She was about to respond when she realized that Raphael was no longer in front of her. While the mayor's mansion was the most elegant household in the city, it was also the least guarded place, as no one in their right mind would choose to attack the mansion. Words were broken bar. You mess with the mayor and his family, and you also mess with the Heroes League. What? Raphael blurted as he saw the brunette woman in front of him again, but this time around, he didn't mask out his contempt for the woman, and he made it evident from the expression on his face. The woman skipped a heartbeat when she saw that look, then avoiding eye contact, she said, you can't go in there, and if still, you decide to take a step from here, I will be forced to make a move against you. I'm being polite right now. Turn around, before I'm forced to do something. You will regret, the woman added. Raphael knitted his brows. He seized the woman from head to toe, and then shook his head. Raphael ignored her warning, and he took a step forward. However, he had only taken a step forward, when a gun was placed at the back of his head. Raphael felt the pistol's muzzle, and his lips curved inwardly. I'm going to warn you, one last time. Turn our broken bar. Before the woman would utter the rest of her words, the pistol in her hand was gone, and before its realization would strike her, she was grabbed tightly. Why were broken bar? Raphael held the gun with one hand, while the other was grabbed onto the woman's neck. He lifted her body off the ground. Are you so tired of living, that death is what you seek? Raphael blurted. I just had my hand cleaned off my body. I don't wish to have it dirty, except it is necessary, of course. Followed by those words, Raphael threw the woman away. Thud. It was merely a casual throw, but the damage it caused to the women was severe. The woman's clothes became tattered from the hit, while a few areas of her body were covered in bruises. Dewey. Raphael watched as the woman spurt blood from her mouth, before then moving his gaze away from her. The pistol was still in his left hand, and Raphael was about to head towards the mansion door when it was suddenly pushed open, and 6 figures stepped out. Instantly, Raphael's eyes went into the green-haired youth in the middle, and as he saw the youth, His lips curved into an amused smile. It was none other than Jake Harper. Jake's eyebrows furrowed, as he saw the look on Raphael's face. His instinct told him danger was in front, and he was to flee this instant. But after the self-praise he had done in the mansion, he rejected the idea. Barnett Gilman, the mayor of Portland City, and his wife, Lizzie Gilman. Raphael assumed the three beside them were their bodyguard, and after staring at them for a few seconds, he slowly moved their gaze away from them. The audacity! Barnett exclaimed. Barnett had wanted to be polite to Raphael because of the guest beside him, but as soon as he saw the woman on the ground, he lost his cool immediately. The three bodyguards beside him took steps forward immediately. However, much to their surprise, there wasn't a change in Raphael's stance. "I see," Barnett muttered, knowing those who were backing him. Only an insane person or someone who wasn't afraid of the Heroes League would be able to commit this sort of offense. Barnett flashed a rough smile soon after. "I'm Barnett Gilman, mayor of Portland City, and messenger of Holy Savior Academy," Barnett stated. "Which force or society does Sir come from, and how may I, the messenger of Holy Savior Academy, help you?" Even a fool could notice what Barnett was trying to infer, and after Barnett spoke, Raphael slowly pointed his hand to the youth beside him. Jake's body trembled as soon as Raphael pointed his finger at him. Terror swept through his body, and instantly he took a step backward. Jake realized that he lost his composure, and quickly, he adjusted himself. He placed his hand behind his back, adopting a powerful stance. He said, "You must be looking for the wrong person, for I can't recall having any business to do with you." Raphael sneered. "Mayor Barnett, I have failed you." Raphael was only just about to speak when he heard that voice. He slowly turned, and as he saw the woman back on her feet, he raised his left hand gently, and before everyone's gaze, he pulled the trigger. 2 seconds after the gunshot sounded, and the woman stumbled to the ground. Lizzie, who was only just a few meters away, screamed loudly. Barnett was quick to hold her tight, and as he also stared at the body with a bullet right at the forehead, there was a grim look on his face. He had watched as one of his guards died in front of him. It would only be insulting if, as the mayor of Portland City, he continued to allow this vile being to remain living after committing such atrocities. "Kill them," Barnett declared. The three guards moved instantly. However, before they could get any close to Raphael, 3 bullets were impeded through their heads. Thud as their bodies dropped to the ground. Raphael stared at the pistol in his hand. He didn't seem to be impressed, but at the same time, he wasn't satisfied with it. "You're from the academy, isn't it?" The smirk that appeared on Raphael's face sent chills all over Jake's body. He gulped hard, and before everyone's gaze, he fled with a pace that would leave even a speedster dumbfounded. Raphael arched an eyebrow. "Could you be any more foolish?" he muttered, and with a casual wave of his hand, Raphael had Jake flying towards him. With only a few inches away from the both of them, Raphael balled his hand into a fist and then sent a full-force blow at Jake. Bang! As the fist struck the back of Jake's head, he stumbled to the ground, with his head colliding with its surface. Jake painfully screeched afterward. However, it wasn't even up to a second after he expressed the anguish he felt when Raphael slowly placed his leg on his head. Please don't," Jake quickly cried out. He could already tell what was coming for him as soon as Raphael placed his leg on his head. "I'm a second-year student. I have plenty of points, treasure, and even gadgets. A broken bar. You just have to let me go, and it is all yours," Jake said in a teary voice. However, if there was a statement more comical, "Life is too short, drive fast and leave a sexy corpse behind," then it was probably this. Raphael chuckled. It was very rare for someone to boast of having gadgets in front of him, and as he stared at Jake on the ground, his lips curved inwardly. "Oh, really?" Raphael said in a seemingly amused tone. "What are these treasures, or gadgets that you speak of?" "Broken bar, and let's not forget how many academy points do you have to offer?" Rachel inquired. While he was brutally battered from that attack, Jake couldn't help but feel a little relieved after he sensed Raphael's interest in his possession. "If you can, please remove your leg from my broken bar head," Then I will tell you where they are, Jake mumbled. Raphael smirked, and while he had been requested to take his leg off, he did the opposite. He raised his leg gently, and just when Jake didn't expect it at all, he stomped his leg heavily on the back of Jake's head once again. Bang! Earlier, Jake had his face covered in blood from the collision, but this time around, it wasn't just a face covered in blood, but the front row of his teeth dropping to the ground. Jake's appearance was horrible, to say the least, and as he opened his mouth to speak, his state would surely cause a demented fellow to burst into laughter. Ha ha! Jake abruptly paused. When he heard that sadistic laughter from above, he clenched his hand into a fist, and then lowered his head in shame. Sorry, what are the things you have to offer? Raphael asked, and for some perplexing relaxing, his voice was soft. Jake gasped. First, I have 700,000 points here. I simply need your number, and the points would be sent to you. I have a lot of treasures that would amount close to 3 million points when sold, and lastly, if you let me go, I promise to give you a gadget made by one of the top engineers in the academy. A gadget made by Raphael Queen, Jake blurted, as Jake didn't get the reaction, or to be more precise, the exclamation he had been expecting after mentioning that name. He spoke, in case you haven't heard, but Raphael is one of the best there is in the academy. Even the director of the tech division said so. Broken bar, and yours truly has one of his gadgets. I know how you must feel, but you simply have to let me go, and I promise to give you the gadget, Jake said. If Jake was able to see the expression on Raphael's face, then with no doubt he would have been flabbergasted, as this was the face of a youth trying his best to stop himself from bursting into laughter. Raphael soon shook his head. I have heard of Raphael Queen, of course, but I must say, his gadget is 1 in a million to obtain. How did you get yours? He responded. The fact that Raphael had reduced the pressure which was exerted on Jake's head, enabled Jake to speak more smoothly. Now, you get it, and you know, I have a good relationship with the guy. I might as well schedule a meeting between the both of you if you're interested. Oh really? Raphael mumbled. Yes, just let me go, and it's done, I promise. Unbeknownst to Jake, after he uttered those words, the expression on Raphael's face immediately, as Gus sat on Raphael's shoulder, whispering some words into his voice, the previous demonic grin vanished, to then be replaced with a bone-chilling smile. Raphael slowly removed his leg from Jake's head, and as Jake managed to lift himself off the ground, Raphael spoke. Where is it? Where is what? Jake replied. He then paused, and after hitting his hand against his face, he spoke. Oh, you mean the gadget and treasures? It's like this. I guess you must be a third-year student. It would explain why you're freakishly strong. Don't get me wrong, it's very good because that way you will face no hurdle to receive my treasures, Jake said. Then, ignoring the look on Raphael's face, he added, the second year is staged to be in the form of a cataclysmic event, but I'm sure you already know that by now. Anyway, my gadget is kept in the 927 cave, Jake said. There is a red rock in the cave. Just underneath the rock, you will find a secret entrance. In there, you will find everything I own. There was soon to be a smile on Jake's face after he spoke, and, followed by a gentle bow, he turned around. Where the hell do you think you're going to? Jake had only taken a few steps forward when he heard that cold voice. He didn't turn toward Raphael and instead said, didn't we have a deal? I tell you where my treasures and gadget are. Jake paused. Oh, how could I have forgotten? I haven't sent the points, I promised. Jake turned towards Raphael. I'm going to need your details, now. Raphael nodded his head, and quickly the exchange was done. Once the points were sent to his account, with notification of payment also received, Jake gave Raphael a thumbs up. He turned around once again and was about to head out of Gilman's mansion when he saw Raphael in front of him. Is there something else you want? Jake politely asked. At the moment, the hair on his body was standing on the end, and it was only a matter of time before he lost his cool. Truthfully, it was really bad enough that he lost all he worked for these past few years. Now having someone pestering him about more was really upsetting. Jake was only able to keep a calm composure despite his horrible state because what he gained far surpassed what he had lost. As Raphael then nodded his head to his question, Jake spoke, "What is it you want from me again?" "What you stole from the academy," Raphael answered. Terror swept through Jake's body the instant he heard those words. He gasped heavily, before then flashing Raphael a rough smile and then saying, "I have no idea what it is you're talking about." Jake took a step back after he spoke. Raphael sneered, and with a step forward, he directly appeared in front of Jake. "Of course you do." With that said, and Raphael punched Jake's face. Bang! Jake's eyes rolled back and forth before he fainted. Raphael soon smiled. He turned towards Barnett and his wife who had been watching the entire show with shock written all over their face and then said, "Do you have a table? And 5 chapters or less than that and we return to the academy." Peace. The Gilman couple had first assumed Raphael was joking when he requested for the table, but as soon as the look on his face went grim they both hurried into the mansion. The onlookers were awestruck by the scene in front of them. After all, it wasn't every day that they got to see the mighty powerful family of Portland City in this state, or as Barnett said, a broken bar, the messenger of Holy Savior Academy. It took a few seconds and a huge table was brought out by 7 guards. The 7 of them had learned 1 or 2 from those who were on the ground, and after the table was placed in front of Raphael, they took a few steps backward. "This person is crazy, who knows when he might decide to shoot," one of the guards said inwardly as he stared at the gun that Raphael was holding on to. Meanwhile, once the table was dropped off, Barnett flashed Raphael a rough smile. Then, holding his wife tightly, he said, "If that's going to be all, I will be taking my leave now." Barnett wasted no other time, and without even having the least of concern about what it was Raphael wanted the table for, he turned around very quickly, walking towards the mansion at a worrisome pace. Raphael watched as Barnett cowardly ran towards the mansion, before then moving his gaze to the 7 guards. It would be a lie to say that Raphael didn't find the terror on their faces amusing. He, however, took a few steps closer to Jake, and once he arrived in front of him, he lifted him off the ground and then threw him to the table. Followed by that quick action, Raphael casually waved his hand, bringing forth a suitcase beside Jake. The suitcase was soon to be open, and while Jake was still unconscious, once he felt an abnormal itch all over his body. His eyes sprang open with fear evident in them. Jake's first move was to flee out of where he was, but he had only just moved a muscle when he found himself tied to the 4 corners of a table. His eyes twitched, and as soon as he came in contact with those blue eyes that had a sort of similarity with the eye of the Grim Reaper, tears dropped out of Jake's eyes immediately. He wept bitterly, but it was still in doubt whether he was crying from seeing Raphael in front of him or the itches he was experiencing all over. "How are you doing?" Raphael asked a question that Jake didn't think he could ever hear considering the state he was in. Surprisingly, despite the fear and yet pain he was feeling over, he was able to nod his head several times, before then saying, Please broken bar, let me go." Jake had only spoken those words when Raphael pulled out a mitre cutter from the box that was close to him, and even though he was tied to the table, it didn't stop Jake from trying to break out of the hold. He kept shaking his body all over the table, but after 20 seconds, he was powerless on the table, seemingly losing all hope. However, if only he knew that he was in for hell itself. Raphael sneered, and moving towards Raphael's lower body, he aligned the mitre cutter against his left toe. "Please broken bar, please don't," Jake pleaded. His pleas were in vain to Raphael's ear, as once the mitre cutter was properly placed in between Jake's little toe, he exerted force on it immediately. Ugh! Jake's scream went so loud that it was capable of raising the dead from their grave, and his scream hadn't even died down when Raphael moved onto his ring toe. The mitre cutter worked wonders, and with another force added once it was aligned, Raphael successfully got rid of the ring toe. "A broken bar, ugh!" Jake painfully screeched, as not only did he have to deal with the itches all over his body, but he also felt horrible pain from his toes being cut off. There was no stopping to his scream, and getting rid of 2 toes certainly didn't satisfy Raphael. Once he had both toes cut off, He soon moved to the rest. "Ugh, stop," Jake yelled, and even though the people in the surroundings weren't the ones experiencing the pain that Jake was feeling all over, they couldn't help but sympathize with him. A majority of them had tears on their faces as they watched Jake scream and yell. Even Barnett and Lizzie, who was watching from one of the windows of the mansion, were deeply terrified of what was occurring down there. No decent being deserved to be treated in this sort of way. It was simply barbaric. To then add to it, such an act was committed in broad daylight. Barnett had one hand on the phone while his eyes were glued to the view in front of him. His lips kept moving, and after a few minutes, he removed the phone from his ear. "How was it?" Lizzie turned towards her husband and asked. Barnett took a deep breath. "I've spoken to them about it. They said they were going to send people here shortly." A smile was soon to appear on Lizzie's face after she heard what her husband had just said. She moved towards him with her hands then wrapped around his waist. She winked her eyes at him seductively. There couldn't be anything more appealing than seeing her man possessing this sort of authority, despite that he wasn't a meta-human. And as Barnett saw the look that was on his wife's face, he grinned like a demented child. But the couple were onto one another, and the atmosphere wasn't so soothing for Jake. At first, it was his 5 toes that were cut off by the mitre cutter. Then once Raphael was done with the left leg, he soon moved to his right leg, and the same cruel act was performed on his left leg also. Mabroken Bahuma, Jake spouted gibberish. He was unable to say actual words, both from the clothes that were stuck in his mouth, as and the excruciating pain he felt from the mitre cutter. It would at least have been better if Raphael were to ask whatever it is he wanted, but for some reason, Raphael seemed to have lost interest in the assignment. Instead, the only focus was ensuring that he had Jake in a place that was more terrible than hell itself. There was no a bit of emotion or even a tinge of sympathy on Raphael's face, and once he was done cutting off Jake's toes, the finger came next. "MHMM," Jake's voice rang out. His veins were in clear. However, despite the tears, the blood, or even the muffled sound he let out, none of that mattered before Raphael. Raphael soon got rid of the fingers on his right hand, but unlike the toes which he simply sliced it off, Raphael went ahead and twisted the finger, before then dragging it out. The pain at which Jake felt from this was double what he felt from his toes cut off. If it hadn't been for the clothes that were shoved in his mouth, his cries would have resounded through the whole city, but Raphael already took care of that. After all, not many liked to hear the cries and screams of their victim. The tears and blood were enough for some. It took a brief moment, and once Raphael had all Jake's fingers on the table, he moved towards him with a smile on his face. "Now, where is it?" Raphael asked politely. "MHM." With tears rolling from his eyes, Jake's muffled voice sounded. Raphael raised an eyebrow. "You won't say where it is? All right then, I did my best." "MMMM." Jake let out the same sound, but this time around he moved his gaze to the clothes that were in his mouth, indicating that he needed them out before he could speak. However, while it was already concluded that Raphael wasn't a reasonable person, Jake never expected it to be to this extent. A burning iron was suddenly got carried out of the suitcase, and less than a second after it emerged Raphael held the iron, and with a sadistic grin on his face, he moved towards Jake. Bloody hell! As the burning iron came in contact with Jake's body, it wasn't Jake who expressed fear, but instead, it was the onlookers. Every single one of them was left flabbergasted as they watched a temperature of steel which was at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 815.56 degrees Celsius, burn through a human body. They soon moved their gaze to Jake, seeing the tears now replaced with blood. It didn't come as much of a surprise to them. The pain was horrible, to say the least, and even though a majority of them had enemies, and hated them to the bone, they didn't wish for this sort of experience of them. Raphael's eyes suddenly twitched, as he saw Jake's eyes rolling back and forth. He removed the clothes that were in his mouth. "Where is it?" Raphael asked. "Bow pocket." Those were Jake's final words as he ascended onto the land of the dead. A disappointing World Cup final, but it is what it is. Jake's death was of less concern to Raphael, and after he heard what he was most interested in, He soon placed his hand into Jake's left pocket, knitting his brows. As the left pocket was empty, Raphael quickly moved to the right pocket, and as soon as he made contact with the object his eyes twitched. It was a miniature book. As the book was brought out of Jake's pocket, Raphael glanced at it for about 5 seconds before putting it into his pocket. He notified the Academy of the completed task, and as a response was given to him, he took away the boxes that were on the table and stepped out of the mansion. "Honey, when will they be here?" He is already. Do something quickly," Lizzie blurted, as she saw Raphael, who was heading towards the gate. "Honey," the look on Barnett's face as he heard his wife was simply priceless. It was almost as if he were wondering if she was hit in the head or something. Lizzie remained oblivious to the expression on Barnett's face, and it was only she turned towards him that she saw the look he had on. "Really, Barnett?" Lizzie folded her hand across her chest. "You're just going to allow him to step out of here, without doing anything?" Shameless. The relationship between Barnett and Lizzie was still new, but at this point, Barnett vividly remembered the words his mother always said to him. "Women are very dangerous species. If you see a snake on this side, and a woman on the other, it best you run towards the snake." Barnett was still in trance when Lizzie walked out on him. Her sudden action prompted him to recover from the state he was in. However, instead of chasing after her like he usually does, he moved his gaze to the window. "You are broken, he's gone." Barnett couldn't help but be relieved as Raphael was out of the mansion, and perhaps even out of the city. For some reason, the Hero Academy failing to arrive didn't bring him down. He was, in fact, a bit jubilant with how it turned out. Apart from those 3 guards, no other person related to him died, and most especially, he was able to save himself from an investment with Jake that would cost him a fortune. Barnett had just taken a deep breath when 2 figures suddenly walked into the room he was in. Quickly, Barnett turned around, and as he saw the duo that just came into the room, his face lit up. "We received your words, Mr. Barnett, and we arrived as soon as we could." "How may we help you, sir?" A tan-skinned, bearded man wearing a navy blue long-sleeve coverall, black protective vest, shin guards as well as black sneakers stood in front of Barnett. Accompanied by the shiny black protective vest was a gold cape behind him. Barnett's eyes twitched, and if the appearance of the man referred to as the Vulture wasn't astounding enough, as he laid eyes on the person beside him, Barnett gasped heavily. "Moonshadow." Barnett lowered his head a second, after which he uttered those names, and even though the person in front of him was old enough to be his daughter, there wasn't a bit of dishonoring on his face. Instead, there was only respect and adoration written all over his face. The black trench coat, black pants, combat boot, and ghoulish mask. There was only one figure in Holy Savior Academy that wore that outfit, and it was none other than the number 1 student in the first year, Alicia Gosling, otherwise known as Moonshadow. Alicia nodded her head, responding to Barnett's earlier greetings. As for Hart, he was used to seeing this sort of expression from those who had heard of Alicia, and after a few seconds, he moved towards Barnett. "What is it, Barnett? We have other missions to tend to. This was the one closest to us, which was why we chose to come here first," said Hart. Hart was the man wearing a navy blue long-sleeve coverall, also known as the Vulture. Barnett slowly raised his head, and after heaving a deep breath, he spoke. "The city was under attack. A broken bar at the bridge that separated Portland City from Vine City." Raphael slowly made his way to the 3 in front, Lucian, Atticus, and Armand. There was a smile on Lucian and Atticus's faces as they stared at Raphael, approaching them. It wasn't a blissful smile that came from the fact that even though they were merely glancing at him, they could already tell that he had improved massively since the last time they met. Raphael arrived in front of the 3 of them and was about to hand out the book when Atticus pulled him into a hug. The expression on Raphael's face changed very quickly. He was about to pull out of the hug when Atticus took a step backward. The smile, however, remained on his face. Raphael brought out the miniature book. "Good day," he said, turning around. It took only a few minutes, and Raphael was out of Atticus, Lucian, and Armand's view. He really is a monster, Armand exclaimed. There was a nod of acknowledgement from Atticus and Lucian after Armand spoke. Raphael was simply one drowse, a broken bar coming from an E-rank metahuman to an A-rank metahuman within a few months, and to make it all outrageous, he was yet to become an enhanced metahuman. Even though he's at the prime age, the kid still makes it look like we were fooling around when we were his age, Lucian said, and then shook his head. Another nod of the head came from the duo beside Lucian. Meanwhile, the youth who was being praised was on his way back to Dale City. Raphael assumed taking the rage out on Jake would have made him a little settled about what transpired, but it didn't. In fact, it made him even more pissed about it. It wasn't sleeping with Aurora that was the main reason for his rage, but it was how he was easily toyed with. What if it hadn't been the extremely horny Aurora that was with him, and it was someone with ill intent towards him? Those were the questions that circulated Raphael's thoughts as he moved to Dale City. There won't be the next time, said Raphael with his hands balled into a fist. A broken bar. A few days passed since Raphael completed the mission assigned to him, and on the 5th day, Raphael left for the academy. I believe this is the right place, said Raphael as he stared at the map in his hand. No, kidding. The alley was one of the biggest places in the academy, as even with the map directing him, it still Raphael hours to arrive at the Deacon Forest. A snort suddenly came from Gus, who was on his shoulder, and as Raphael raised his head, he sees the figure in front of him, a stark naked two-headed, four-armed as well as four-legged man, sat on a stool a few meters away from Raphael. The man was hairy all over that even though he wasn't putting on any clothing, the hairs around him covered his junk from being seen, and to the student who had encountered the man, they considered it to be a terrific thing, considering he had doubled his hand, head, and legs. Who knows what he would harbor below? Raphael was quick to move his gaze to the man's face. After a few seconds, he took steps forward, and once he arrived in front of the man, he spoke. Raphael Queen, second-year student, reporting back to the academy. There was then a moment of awkwardness between Raphael and the man. Earlier, it hadn't just been Raphael who was seizing the man, he was also doing the same, but, while Raphael spent less than 5 seconds on it, the man's action was otherwise. He had his eyes fixed on Raphael's body, and even as he stood before, he didn't stop to seize him up. The stare was creepy to say the least. A broken bar. Raphael was however able to remain neutral to the man's stares, but if at most, the man were to make a move, Raphael was more than prepared for him. Warrior spirit, the man suddenly muttered. Zedicus then clapped his hand together. You have, Zedicus of the North, approval. You may now proceed to New Age City. The casual clap by Zedicus brought forth a split in the forest was in a broken bar. It became more like an interdimension, and as Raphael stared at the view in front of him, his mouth opened slightly. Wondrous, Raphael moved his gaze to the two-headed men, but much to his surprise, the man was no longer in front of him. He took a breath and then walked forward. A broken bar. New Age City. Unlike its name, the city had catastrophic surroundings, ruined buildings, fire outbursts, lightning sparks, and most especially meta-beasts flocked around the city, not to also forget. They were acidic rain in some places in the city. Raphael stared at the places he was in, and he couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. There was no point in turning around, as once his whole body stepped into the city, the split that was created by Zedicus closed immediately. Dinosaurs, Raphael slowly mumbled. The appearance of dinosaurs surely intrigued Raphael, as those beasts were said to have gone extinct. But, in this city, they existed. Raphael allowed his mind to wonder what sort of powers they will possess considering they were meta-beasts, and he didn't have to wait too long when one of the dinosaurs opened its mouth. A ball that was condensed of 4 different elemental powers emerged from the dinosaurs. Raphael was left thundered by the sight of a huge ball, and when he struck it as a target, he staggered a few steps backward. Catastrophic. There was however no fear on his face. Instead, it was pure excitement. As Raphael stared at the dinosaurs, he was like a kid who was curious about what was in a toy that made it act the way it did. Raphael, A bone-chilling smile appeared on Raphael's face as he felt someone touching his shoulder. He turned towards the person with a grim look on his face, but just as he laid eyes on Becky and Melinda, the expression on his face softened a little. "Geez, what are you thinking about? I've been calling you for like an hour," Becky blurted. Raphael raised an eyebrow after Becky spoke. "It couldn't be that time moved twice faster in here, could it?" Raphael could vividly recall that he had only just arrived here, not to talk of an hour. He hadn't even spent 15 minutes here. As Melinda saw the look on Raphael, she spoke. "She's messing around with you." Raphael relaxed a bit upon Melinda's words. He turned towards Becky, and seeing her tongue hanging out of her mouth, he shook his head. "Anyway, we need to hurry up," Melinda said. "Everyone has been waiting for you to arrive." "Why?" Raphael asked, seemingly perplexed. Melinda paused. "The instructors said, the city won't be open to us until you arrive, so we have no choice but to wait for you." "You mean a broken bar?" Raphael pointed his hand at the dinosaurs in front, and Melinda instantly understood what he was referring to. She nodded her repeatedly. "All this isn't real. New Age City is more dreadful than this, of course." As Raphael stared at Melinda, he couldn't exactly pin the dot, but there was a change in demeanor that he received from her, almost like she was more confident about her prowess. "Let's go, Raphael." Raphael's lips curved inwardly, and he cracked his left knuckles, before then moving forward. It took a few minutes, and the three of them arrived at a camp. Raphael glanced at the surrounding, and as he saw a trio waving hands at him, he smiled lightly. "Raphael, over here," Bane's voice rang out. Bane's appearance hadn't changed much since the last time they met. The same goes for Aiden, as well as Devon. A smile hung on Raphael's face. However, the smile on his face soon disappeared when he sensed a killing intent from the surrounding. The expression on Raphael's face turned grim instantly. He turned towards the direction which the killing intent was coming from. "Hilario," Raphael mumbled. There were hundreds of students from each of the 7 divisions glaring at him, but as Raphael laid eyes on Hilario, a light frown appeared on his face. "Raphael," followed by that loud voice was a figure leaping towards Raphael, and as Raphael saw the black-haired woman, his lips curved into an amused smile quickly. He grabbed Eliza by the waist. As she wrapped her legs around him, there was a smile on both of their faces, and after trailing her hand across Raphael's face, Eliza spoke. "I missed you so much," she said as she wrapped her hands around his neck. There was tenderness, warmth, and in fact love, present in her voice, and then seeing the look on that God-crafted face of his, the blissful smile on Eliza's face widened. The blue glittering eyes, that were frightening to others, caused their heart to melt, and as he spoke softly to her, body tingled in delight. "I missed you too," Raphael said, looking into Eliza's eyes. Then, ignoring the gazes of the people in the surrounding, including her brother whose mouth was wide open, Eliza pulled Raphael in for a wild kiss. An 100 power stones or 30 golden tickets before the end of the week, and we get a 5-chapter mass release. My broken bar. Eliza let out a soft moan amidst the passionate kiss. She held his face, as he sought after her lips in her frenzied, and the classiness of how Raphael went after her caused Eliza to begin to lose control of herself. As the kisses got more intense between them, Eliza placed her hands on the back of Raphael's head. Unknowingly, she gripped his hair tightly, causing him to groan a little, and as punishment, she got bitten on her lips. But while that was considered to be a punishment, it wasn't one for Eliza. She tightened her legs around Raphael's body, sucking his lips roughly. Those painful soft moans Eliza let out as Raphael reciprocated the rough kisses, were simply blissful. His tongue sought her tongue, as he sucked it to taste her entirely. The thread of saliva was making and breaking as the aroused bodies didn't wish to stop. However, after a long time, both of them stopped. They panted heavily, and staring into the other eyes, lust was evident from both sides. Eliza slowly leaned towards Raphael, as she was to make contact with his lips once again. A light cough suddenly rang out. It wasn't from one of the students, but instead from the instructor in front of them, and as of this moment, Elisa realized what exactly she had just done. She turned towards Raphael with shock written all over her face. A second after, she slowly got down from Raphael. Elisa lowered her head and cowered behind Raphael. As for Raphael, he adjusted his clothes, then with no tinge of shame on his face, he stared at the man in front of him. "Damn," Louise exclaimed, "but, I must say, you handed your sister to the right person, someone who would fulfill all her unfulfilled desires because she clearly has many." Louise said, "You can already tell that he treats her right, and after 3 months, she can't wait to get some of him. I bet he gives it to her dirty." Surely, no brother would like to hear certain words about his sister, and this was one of them. "Bastard," Mason blurted, with then a stomp from Mason. He transformed into a 14-meter-tall Titan immediately, and as Louise saw Mason dashing towards him, a sly smile appeared on his face. He then cracked his knuckles, and instantly, he transformed into a 15-meter-tall giant. Louise and Mason were no strangers to one another. They had, in fact, fought together in the tournament. Mason had the power to use the trait of a Titan, while Louise possessed the power to use the trait of a giant. The both of them fists were about to collide with one another when Jeremy hovered in front of Mason. This, of course, didn't stop Mason from launching a punch forward, but his fist met an obstacle. Bang! Mason staggered a few steps backward, and as he stared at Jeremy, there was terror written on his face. A full-force punch from Mason was stopped with a causal finger from Jeremy. Jeremy had done it so easily that it seemed that Mason's full strength was worth nothing. "It's my turn," said Jeremy. Mason's eyes twitched. "Why you broken bar?" he stuttered, and a second after Jeremy spoke, he struck a blow at him. Before the attack, Mason could either elude the attack or send one of his forwards, but as Mason was to do the latter, he found himself unable to move from where he was. Terror swept through Mason's body, as death flashed within his eyes. There was a destructive force in that punch that Mason and the others felt that if he didn't dodge the attack, then death was inevitable. With only a few inches separating him from coming in contact with Jeremy's fist, Mason shut his eyes closed. He desperately wanted to make a move, but the strength to do wasn't there. Time seemed to pass very quickly, but after a few seconds and no damage of any sort occurred to him. Mason's opened an eye. He stared at his surrounding, and his eye came in contact with Raphael. His other eye sprang open. "Raphael," Mason mumbled in a low voice. Clearly, he hadn't been expecting Raphael to intervene in the fight. With Raphael standing on Mason's shoulder, and Jeremy hovering in front of him, the atmosphere got intense very quickly. Whether it was the students, the instructors, or the guards, they all had their eyes on Raphael and Jeremy. Even though Jeremy had lost to Hilario, and it denied his chance of facing Raphael in the tournament, there was no doubt that it was one of the most anticipated fights in the academy. Raphael stared at Jeremy with a neutral expression on his face, but likewise did Jeremy. They both had eyes on each other. However, after a few seconds, Jeremy's lips curved into a sly smile, and he said, "Nicely done, Raphael." It was all eyes on Jeremy, and as he bowed his hand into a fist, there was excitement written on the majority of the people in the surrounding. However, the excitement soon died, known by Jeremy's following words. "Now isn't the time, but surely, we will meet soon enough," Jeremy said flatly. With his hand placed behind his back, he landed on the ground and then moved to the murderer division. As the other students stared at Jeremy, so did Raphael. His thought was unknown, but briefly after he moved to the murderer division camp, Raphael turned towards Mason. "You're too weak," Raphael stated. "I did this because of Elisa. There won't be a next time," followed by those words, and Raphael touched the ground. A stern expression emerged on Mason's face. He knew Raphael was saying the truth, but it still sounded wrong when it was coming from him. Mason heaved a deep breath, before then readjusting to his human form. Meanwhile, once Raphael walked back to Elisa and the rest, Elisa held his hand. "Thank you so much," she said, and then pecked him on the cheek. As for Bane, Aiden, and Devon, the three of them kept staring at Raphael, grinning like a demented child. "Ask him, you ask him. No, a broken bar, you ask him," It would be a lie to say Raphael wasn't aware of what the three of them intended, but he instead chose to keep a straight face. He ignored them and moved his eyes to the instructor, who stepped forward. "It seems to be like you all aren't interested in what we have to say, and would prefer to go ahead, fighting with each other. So, we will go straight to the point." Followed by those words, Atticus turned towards Lucian. "Open the city." With then a nod from Lucian, he clapped both his hands together, and a door appeared a few meters away from where it was. The students were still staring at the door when a paper flew towards them. Some of you might have already learned about it from your seniors, but for those who don't, the second year is going to hold in a cataclysm period, and it's precisely what you have in mind. Atticus paused. "The papers in your hand will explain everything you need to know, as well as to survive in there. I wish you all best of luck, and also hope we get to meet each other again," said Atticus. "I suggest you have a few moments with your friends, colleagues, acquaintances as well as instructors, because in the era broken by its survival of the fittest." Atticus had made it seem like they had some time to spend, but it wasn't even up to 5 seconds after he spoke that the door opened. After the door opened, a majority of the students tried to look into it, including Raphael, but regardless of how far they looked, it was void of nothing. The door didn't seem to lead to anywhere, but they were all sure that was false, as it wouldn't be in front of them if it were useless. "You will move in based on division ranks. The elite division is first, then the murderer division, and so on." Broken bar, Atticus said. He moved his gaze to where the elite division students were. "You go into the city, one after the other." However, none of the students moved a step from where they were, which then prompted Atticus to say, "Not to worry, no harm will befall any one of you. Even though the city is full of danger, the academy is generous enough, and you will have a day to prepare for the worst." Those words managed to comfort the student a little. Most were already aware of what lay in the city, but at least they would get to settle in there before it begins. "Raphael, I believe you must choose the 10 students who would live in the mansion with you, isn't it?" Atticus, though Raphael was the one who was asked the question, Bane, Aiden, and Devon had a huge smiles on their faces. Raphael shook his head. "I don't have 10, but I have selected a few people." One of the tournament rewards included a mansion in a New Age city, and as the students recalled these details, they couldn't help but wish they were the ones who won the tournament. In a city where there was no shelter, and swarmed with overwhelming meta beasts, looking to rip one to shreds, it was certainly good to have a mansion that all beasts were prohibited from. Remember, survival of the fittest, only the strong and ruthless will survive, so show no mercy in there, Atticus said flatly. "Goodbye." The outside of the mansion had already left Devon, and the others dumbfounded, but as they all walked inside, they were left even more startled. Bane's mouth opened so wide that an egg could fit inside. He stared at the mansion, and then gripped onto himself, wondering if he was in a dream or something. "Oh, nope, it's all real," Bane said flatly. He then flashed a rough smile, before taking steps forward. It wasn't just Bane who was left stunned by the interior of the mansion, but the other 6 beside as well as in front of him were Raphael, Eliza, Devon, Aiden, Melinda, and Becky. Though the academy had termed the mansion as a luxurious one, they still felt they had underestimated the academy greatly. This place was heaven, to be exact. Whether it was the stained glass ceiling, the luxurious upholstery fabric, the antique rugs, or even a heavenly designed fireplace, the interior of the mansion was simply a beauty, and as Bane moved his gaze to the flooring materials that were of high-end hardwood species, he found no need for beds or couches anymore. This floor was very suitable to sit and in fact sleep on. "Come look at this," Aiden's voice rang out. Quickly, Bane moved his gaze away from the floor and made his way to Aiden. "Oh my God," Bane blurted, "someone holds him quickly. How can a TV be this huge?" Bane exclaimed. Aiden chuckled, and as his gaze met with Bane, the both of them nodded their head, and the expression on their face somehow became creepy. After staring at the TV for a few minutes, Bane and Aiden were able to shift their attention somewhere. The both of them went to explore all other parts of the mansion. and with each room or item that they passed by, the both of them let out some weird noise. As Bane, Devon, and Aidan moved about the room, so did Melinda and Becky. The two ladies were rather composed with themselves and were able to keep the excitement to themselves. They couldn't help but be excited, as while the majority of the students had to go through hell, they were in comfort. "He is really a one-of-a-kind," Becky said. A nod of acknowledgement soon came from Melinda after Becky spoke. Both of them knew that they would have never received this sort of comfort if it hadn't been for Raphael. In fact, the chances of them dying from one of the beasts in the city once the settling period was very high. New Age City, a broken bar. It's more like Meta Beast City. Bane, Aidan, Melinda, and Becky had showered the mansion and the person who allowed them to be here in praise, and now it was Elisa's turn. She faced Raphael, wrapping her hand around his waist. She said, "How do you want me to thank you for this?" The innocent expression Elisa had on her face was one thing, then the tone of her voice was one another. Raphael stared at Gus, who was on his shoulder, apparently wondering how someone could have this look on her face, and then be shameless. Gus shook its head, and as if getting the message from Raphael, it flew away from his shoulder, heading towards the master suite. Elisa chuckled upon Gus's action. The disappointed look from Gus didn't go unnoticed by Elisa, and after Gus was no longer in sight, she placed one hand on Raphael's chest. "So, will you tell me what is it you want, or should I just go ahead with what I have planned all holiday for you?" Elisa said. There was a seductive tone in Elisa's voice, and as she didn't shy away from Raphael's gaze, lust was evident in her eyes. Suddenly, Raphael arched his brows, his mouth opened slightly, then staring at where Elisa's hand was, his lips curved inwardly. "What are you doing? Are you not scared that someone might come any time from now?" Raphael asked. In response, Elisa shook her head. "What's there to be scared about? It's not like I'm doing it to someone else's broken bar. I'm doing it with my man, so it's not anyone's concern," Elisa responded. "Okay then," Raphael smirked. Upon Raphael's words, Elisa stood on her toes and then pecked him directly on the lips. "We can do that later. First, let's check out the mansion, and then you tell me how the holiday was a broken bar." "I heard you went on a mission," Elisa said. Elisa walked over to the staircase. She was about to take a step forward when she paused. She turned towards Raphael, who hadn't moved from where he was, and she said, "Come on, let's go." However, despite those words, Raphael didn't move from where he was. He continued to stare at her, and after a few seconds, he pointed his hand at her. Elisa was at first confused when she saw Raphael's finger pointing at her, but as soon as she followed the direction, and saw where he was pointing her, she tilted her head gently. "Really?" Raphael nodded his head. "What if someone walks in?" Elisa said. As Raphael then shrugged his shoulder at her, Elisa heaved a deep breath. "Okay, fine," she stated, accepting Raphael's demands. Raphael's eyes then flickered, as after Elisa spoke, she lifted her clothes, and he got to see those two melons. A smile hung on his face, and after a few seconds, he nodded his head repeatedly. The truth was, most of the students in the academy assumed Raphael was an ass man, but only Elisa knew that he was a boobs man as well. Whenever they were alone, Raphael couldn't go a day without placing his hand on them. In fact, he slept with his hand placed inside of her cloth. After Raphael had gotten a good look at her bosom, Elisa released her grip on her cloth. "Are you happy now?" she said with a light smile on her face. "Good, let's go," Elisa continued. The both of them were about to take a step forward when a knock came on the door. Elisa and Raphael abruptly paused. They both turned towards her, and with a wave of the hand, a dagger appeared in Elisa's hand. "There's no need," said Raphael. "Apart from meta beasts, the mansion also forbids anyone with ill intent towards, so, whoever is there, has no intention to hurt any one of us." It was only after Raphael spoke that Elisa returned the dagger to her back pocket. She, however, continued to stare at the door. "Open," followed by Raphael's command. The door opened, and briefly after, a figure walked into the mansion. A smile soon appeared on Elisa's face when she saw the person who came in. She hurried towards the figure. "Thank goodness, you're here, Aurora," Eliza said as she held Aurora's hand. The expression on Raphael's face changed very quickly. He raised an eyebrow, as he moved his gaze to the door, and as Eliza pulled Aurora in, Raphael glared at Aurora. "Yeah, broken bar, I came to give you this." Aurora stuttered for a bit before then properly getting the words out of her mouth. Eliza's eyes were already on the glass box that was in Aurora's hand, and as soon as she heard her speak, there was a flicker of excitement on her face. "It's all there?" Eliza asked, and as a nod came from Aurora, Eliza's lips curved into a smile. "Thank you so much, Aurora. How can I ever repay you for this?" There was no hesitation from Aurora and, followed by Eliza's words, she shook her head immediately. "It's fine, Eliza. I didn't do it because I wanted something from you, okay?" Aurora added, and handed Eliza the box. Suddenly, Eliza's eyes became teary. Aurora was about to speak when she was pulled into a big hug. Eliza rubbed her hand against Aurora's back, and after a few seconds, she pulled out of the hug. Raphael, who was standing a few meters away, stood with his hand folded across his chest. It would be a lie to say he wasn't exactly curious about what could be in the glass box that could make Eliza act this way. However, while he was curious about it, Raphael didn't inquire or speak about it. He simply stared at the two women in front of him with the usual poker face. "I will be on my way now, take care of yourself, Eliza," Aurora said. She turned around and was about to head out of the mansion when Eliza held her back. "Wait, right here, I will be back," Eliza said, and before Aurora could even retort to her, she hurried towards Raphael, staring at the duo in front. Aurora slowly clenched her hands into a tight fists. She dug her nails into her palm, causing it to bleed, while she bit her lower lips hard. Aurora was unable to hear any of what was being said by Raphael and Eliza. All she saw was Raphael shaking his head repeatedly, while Eliza held his hand. There also seems to be the word, "please," coming from Eliza, and the expression on her face showed that she was asking something from Raphael. For some reason, Aurora already got a wary feeling about what was about to occur, and just as Eliza turned around, her heart skipped a beat. "Aurora, why you broken bar?" Eliza had only just spoken when she saw Aurora take a step backward. She moved towards her friend who was now trembling violently, holding her body gently. She asked, "Are you all right?" "I am," Aurora replied and then chuckled wryly, and while the response was quick, it somehow gave the feeling that Aurora wasn't being truthful. Eliza peered deep into Aurora's eyes. She seemed to want to say something, but after giving it a thought, she opposed to the idea. It was a bit obvious that something was bothering, and despite how much Eliza wanted to figure out what was wrong with her best friend, she knew Aurora wasn't going to speak in the presence of Raphael. Eliza shook her head. "Anyway, I just spoke to Raphael, and he has agreed. You can come stay here with us." The first part of Eliza's words had caused Aurora's heart to beat rapidly, but as soon as she heard the rest, it was even more worse than she imagined. Aurora slowly turned towards Raphael. As of now, she finally understood why he kept shaking his head, and why that expression was on Eliza's face. It all became clear to hear a broken bar. She couldn't necessarily blame Raphael for not wanting her here because even she didn't want to be here. "Raphael, where are you going?" Eliza muttered as Raphael began towards the upper floor. There was no response from Raphael, however. He continued to walk up the stairs, acting as though he had none of what Eliza had just said. Eliza smiled, before then moving her gaze toward Aurora. "Don't worry about him, he will surely come around," Eliza said. Aurora nodded her head, but as she realized what she just did, her eyes twitched. She let out a rough smile and was about to speak when a blue owl suddenly made its way to them. Gus stood on one of the 4 pillars, staring at Aurora and Eliza, with an interesting expression on his face. Eliza didn't find anything weird in the look on Gus. She glanced at him for a bit, before then moving her gaze to Aurora. "So, what's it going to be? Do we have to go get your back, or what? How is it going to be?" Eliza asked, seemingly excited. "I'm not moving in, Eliza." A second after Eliza spoke, and Aurora gave her response, The look on her face showed that it wasn't up for discussion. There was no way in hell that Aurora felt she would live in this place. Eliza sensed the change in demeanor from Aurora and said, "Is there something wrong, and why don't you want to live here? And don't tell me it's because you have a place of your own, because I know you don't," Eliza added. Aurora frowned upon Eliza's words. "Fine, but I still can't live here with you people," Aurora stated. "I can't." Seeing the stern look on Aurora's face, Eliza's face turned eerie. She held Aurora's hand gently. "We've known each other since we were 5, Aurora, and we have been there for each other since then." Eliza paused. "I know, this might be selfish for me to say, but the truth is I need you more than ever. I'm not sure if I can handle this next few days without my best friend by my side, so, please." He broken bar "Please, Aurora, don't turn me down." Aurora bit her lower lips harder. Seeing the look that was on Eliza's face, she took a deep breath soon after and said, "Okay, Eliza, I will come stay here, but only for a few days, that's all." The previous saddened look that was on Eliza vanished instantly, and right after hugging, she let out a chuckle. "Good," Eliza exclaimed. As for Gus, it shook its head several times before flying away. "What are you still waiting for? Let's go get your bags," Eliza said, "and you also have to tell me where you spent your holiday, because I came to your place, and you weren't there." Eliza abruptly paused. She stared at Aurora. "I keep getting the feeling that you're hiding something from me. You have a man, isn't it?" Aurora's mouth widened. Her heart kept beating fast, and even though she wanted to speak, no words could leave her mouth. "Yeah, broken bar," Aurora stuttered. "I'm just joking, silly." Eliza chuckled. "I believe I will be the first person who gets to know when that happens," Eliza said, and with Aurora behind her, they soon left the mansion.